I worked 2 jobs to pay for college, believing my parents couldn't afford it. Last month, I found a savings account in my name, untouched for years. When I asked why I was never told, they said it was for emergencies. Meanwhile, my siblings' tuition was fully funded. I don't know whether to feel grateful, angry, or both, and I don't know if asking about it will fracture my family. The morning sun spilled through the half-open blinds, brushing the walls of a modest apartment in pale gold. Dust motes hovered like tiny specks of stardust in the warm light, dancing slowly in the quiet. Emma sat at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee before her, staring at the floorboards beneath her worn sneakers. The apartment smelled faintly of toast and old wood, the kind of lingering comfort that comes from years of routine. Outside, the distant hum of traffic mixed with the occasional chirp of birds, a soundtrack she had learned to tune out long ago. Enjoying the story? Hit like, share, and subscribe to our channel. She had been working 2 jobs for as long as she could remember. An after-school shift at the coffee shop, weekends in a small, cramped bookstore tucked between a laundromat and a dry cleaner. Each paycheck felt like a victory, small but hard-earned. And yet, no matter how carefully she budgeted, the looming pressure of tuition payments gnawed at her. College had always felt like an impossible mountain, its peak shrouded in fog, distant and unattainable. Emma had convinced herself that her parents simply couldn't afford it. They were good people, kind, patient, but there had always been that unspoken weight, a quiet resignation in their eyes whenever money came up. And so, she had carried the burden alone, pushing herself further than she thought possible, telling herself that this sacrifice was worth it. Every late night studying, every skipped weekend with friends, every exhausted morning walking the same streets, this was her life. Her parents smiled when she succeeded academically, but there had never been an offer to lift the financial strain. That was Emma's responsibility. Always had been. It wasn't until last month that everything shifted. While searching through old paperwork in a cluttered drawer, Emma's fingers brushed against a folder she didn't recognize. She pulled it out and blinked at the neatly typed words on a faded sheet of paper. A savings account statement, untouched for years, her name printed clearly at the top. She froze, heart hammering in her chest. The balance. Enough to cover her entire tuition. She didn't notice the coffee cooling beside her as she reread the numbers over and over, a growing sense of disbelief anchoring her to the chair. How had she never known? How had she spent countless nights worrying, working herself to the bone, when her parents had quietly set this aside? And yet, the revelation brought no immediate relief. Instead, a swirl of emotions churned in her chest. Gratitude, confusion, and a slow burning anger she hadn't anticipated. When she confronted her parents, the conversation was cautious, tense. The kitchen, usually a place of quiet domestic comfort, felt suffocating, the air thick with unspoken questions. Her mother, eyes gentle but guarded, spoke first. "It's for emergencies," she said softly, as if the words themselves could contain the magnitude of the secret. Her father nodded, a slight frown creasing his forehead. "We wanted to make sure you'd learn to manage on your own," he added, almost apologetically. Emma's mind raced. She thought of her younger sibling, whose tuition had been fully funded from the start, free of any worry, free to focus entirely on school and social life. The disparity stung like salt on an open wound. Why had they been treated differently? And what did it mean for her relationship with the people she trusted most? She wanted to ask, to demand, to understand, but a strange caution gripped her, as though any words spoken too loudly might shatter the fragile fabric of her family forever. She spent the next days wandering through her life with a new, wary awareness. Every interaction, every gesture of her parents suddenly seemed layered with hidden meanings. The quiet way her father lingered by the kitchen door, the distracted smiles of her mother when she spoke about her day. Were these signs of love, or reminders of secrets kept? The apartment felt smaller, the sunlight harsher, and the noises of the city outside sharper somehow, as if the world itself had tilted slightly off-axis. Emma began retracing her steps through her past, remembering late nights counting pennies, the sting of rejection when she applied for scholarships she didn't receive, the small triumphs of scraping together enough for textbooks. Each memory now carried a bitter aftertaste. She had fought alone, believed in her own strength, but the revelation that she could have been spared this struggle nagged at her relentlessly. She wanted to feel grateful, but the anger simmered just beneath the surface, an ember that refused to extinguish. And then came the moments of quiet observation, the subtle realizations that made her chest tighten. Her parents weren't careless. They weren't even cruel. They had reasons, complicated and buried, for the choices they made. But the uneven treatment between her and her sibling created a fracture, one that Emma couldn't ignore. She found herself replaying conversations, examining every smile, every word of encouragement, and wondering if any of it had been tinged with calculation, or if it had been genuine at all. One evening, she walked alone through the neighborhood, the fading orange glow of sunset painting the streets in soft light. The familiar sights, the cracked sidewalks, the low brick buildings, the small cafe with a faded sign, felt suddenly foreign. She passed the bookstore where she had worked for years, the smell of old paper and varnish wafting into the street as she lingered at the entrance. She had spent countless hours there, dreaming of escape, imagining a life unburdened by bills and responsibilities. And now, the irony struck her. Her dreams had been within reach all along. The internal conflict became almost unbearable. Every step she took carried the weight of questions she didn't know how to answer. Should she confront her parents again? Demand an explanation? Should she forgive silently, bearing the anger beneath layers of politeness? Or should she hold the secret as a quiet personal revelation, letting it simmer and reshape her understanding of her own resilience? Each option seemed flawed, each path fraught with potential heartbreak. Late that night, lying in bed with the hum of the city outside her window, Emma felt the first stirrings of a plan forming. She would not confront them immediately. Not yet. She needed clarity, perspective, a way to understand the full picture without allowing emotion to dictate action. Her mind wandered to her sibling, blissfully unaware of the turmoil, walking a path laid smooth by parental generosity. Emma felt a pang of envy, but also a strange protective urge, as if she were navigating a labyrinth of emotions, not just for herself, but to preserve the fragile balance of her family. Sleep eventually claimed her, restless and fragmented, the dreams thick with half-formed memories of past struggles and imagined confrontations. Shadows moved across the ceiling, morphing into shapes that seemed to whisper secrets she couldn't yet decipher. She awoke hours later to the sound of rain tapping gently against the window pane, the world outside muted and gray. The day stretched ahead of her like an uncertain road, lined with the potential for discovery, confrontation, or heartbreak. Emma made a quiet promise to herself. She would uncover the full truth, no matter how complex or uncomfortable it might be. And in the process, she realized she might uncover not just the motives of her parents, but the contours of her own identity, the resilience, the anger, the love, and the unspoken longing that had driven her for so long. Somewhere in the tension of gratitude and betrayal, there was a story that needed to be told, a revelation waiting to reshape everything she thought she knew. And so, she began watching, listening, piecing together fragments of conversations and glances, small details that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. Every gesture of her parents, every interaction with her sibling, every corner of the apartment seemed charged with new meaning. Each observation was a thread, and she knew that if she followed them carefully, the tapestry of her family's secrets would eventually reveal itself, perhaps with consequences she could not yet imagine. The days that followed were a delicate balance of observation and restraint. Emma moved through the apartment with a heightened awareness, each footstep on the worn linoleum echoing like a drumbeat in her mind. The ordinary rhythms of her parents' lives, their morning coffee ritual, the faint clink of keys as her father left for work, the soft shuffle of her mother sorting laundry, suddenly felt like coded messages. She found herself studying their faces, the faint lines that mapped years of sacrifice, the subtle hesitation before answering her questions. There was something more behind the explanation they had given, some shadowed rationale they had not voiced. Her sibling, Marcus, remained blissfully oblivious. He was immersed in his own world of university lectures, late-night parties, and easy victories that Emma had earned through sheer grit. The contrast was almost unbearable. She felt a gnawing mix of envy and protectiveness, like watching someone walk a path she had fought so hard to clear, only to realize it had been smoothed out before them. Marcus laughed too loudly in the kitchen one afternoon, his voice bouncing off the walls, and Emma felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't hatred. It was something subtler, sharper, a bittersweet ache that made her chest tighten. She started revisiting the old documents, scanning bank statements, receipts, letters tucked away in forgotten drawers. There was a rhythm to it. A detective's patience, the thrill of uncovering hidden truths, one fragment at a time. Her fingers lingered over the numbers, tracing them as if they were hieroglyphs, containing a secret language only she could decode. With each passing day, the picture became more complex, more perplexing. There were deposits she hadn't known about, carefully timed transfers, subtle patterns that suggested intent far beyond the simple idea of emergencies. One evening, Emma decided to take a walk, letting the city's gray light and damp air clear her thoughts. She wandered through the streets with a notebook in hand, jotting down memories, observations, and questions she didn't yet know how to ask. The streets were slick from the afternoon drizzle, neon signs reflecting in puddles like fractured mirrors. The city felt alive in a way that mirrored her own internal chaos, a world bustling with secrets and stories just out of reach. She paused outside a small park, the trees bare and skeletal against the dusky sky. The wind rustled through the branches, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Emma leaned against the cold metal of a bench, her mind replaying every conversation she had ever had with her parents about money, about responsibility, about fairness. Each word now seemed layered, a puzzle she was only beginning to piece together. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "It's for emergencies." But Emma had started to see patterns in the past she had never noticed. Times when she had been denied a small request for financial help, only to later learn that the money existed. Moments when Marcus had been given the benefit of the doubt, privileges quietly extended, while she had been left to struggle. The emotional weight pressed down on her chest, a mix of gratitude for their careful planning and a sharp, persistent anger at the inequity. Returning home, Emma noticed the subtle ways her parents' routines had shifted in the past month, perhaps sensing her unease. Her father lingered longer in the kitchen, clearing dishes with hands that trembled slightly, eyes avoiding hers. Her mother moved, with a careful deliberation, choosing words as if they were fragile objects, delicate and dangerous if handled too roughly. Emma felt the tension like a physical presence, a silent wall she could not cross without triggering a collapse. That night, unable to sleep, she retreated to her room, the small lamp casting a warm circle of light across the walls covered in posters, photos, and a calendar marked with assignments and deadlines. Her notebook lay open on the bed, filled with observations, questions, and partial conclusions. She realized she needed to confront the past, but not in the direct, accusatory way she had imagined. There was more to the story. She was sure of it. A reason, perhaps even a justification, that she had not yet understood. Emma decided to start with a subtle approach. She asked her mother about small details, stories from her childhood, casual questions that seemed innocuous, but were carefully designed to reveal patterns. "Do you remember when I asked about the science camp?" she inquired one evening, watching her mother carefully as she set the table. Her mother's hands paused mid-motion, a faint furrow on her brow. "Yes," she said slowly. "I thought it might be too expensive at the time." Emma nodded, a faint smile masking the whirlwind inside. The next day she tried a different tactic. She lingered in the living room while her father watched the news, casually mentioning a story about unexpected inheritances. "It's strange how people save for things without telling their children," she said lightly, sipping tea. Her father's eyes flickered toward her, a subtle shift in expression, almost imperceptible. Emma made a mental note of the reaction, storing it alongside her growing collection of clues. Weeks passed in this manner, the quiet tension escalating like a low, steady drumbeat. Emma began to see more patterns in her family's history. Her parents had not been reckless with money. They had been calculating, careful, almost obsessive in their desire to teach responsibility. But the favoritism toward Marcus remained a stubborn, undeniable truth. The realization made her feel both sorrow and fury, a disorienting combination that left her drained by the end of each day. Then came the letter, slipped under her bedroom door without warning. Emma found it at midnight, a single sheet of paper folded with meticulous care. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it, revealing neat, familiar handwriting. "Emma," it read, "there are things you don't know about our past. Some truths are too heavy to share all at once. Please be patient. We want you to understand, not to feel burdened. Mom." Her heart thudded so violently it felt like it might burst. The letter was an olive branch, but also a warning, an acknowledgement that her curiosity had pierced deeper than anticipated. Questions raced through her mind. What secrets had they kept? Why had they chosen Marcus for certain privileges? And most crucially, what did they consider an emergency in a way that required withholding help from her for years? The following morning, Emma confronted her parents, not with anger, but with a quiet, probing determination. "I found the account," she said, voice measured, almost brittle. "I know it's been there for years. I need to understand why." Her mother looked at her, eyes glistening with something she could not name. Regret, fear, hope? "Emma," she whispered, voice trembling, "some things are harder to explain than to act. We did what we thought was best, even if it wasn't fair. You've always been strong, independent, responsible. We wanted you to learn resilience. It wasn't easy for us either, but we hoped you'd see the love behind the decisions, even if the methods were flawed." Her father nodded, voice low, almost reverent. "We never wanted you to feel less than. Sometimes, the weight of love is heavier than the weight of money. It's a lesson you had to carry yourself. And perhaps we misjudged the cost." Emma felt the room tilt around her. The words were both relief and torment, clarity and chaos. She wanted to scream, to cry, to demand justice. But instead, she felt a strange, surreal sense of acceptance. They had erred, yes, but their intentions had been rooted in something she hadn't fully grasped until now. A complicated, messy love that had shaped every choice, every restriction, every secret. And yet, even as understanding began to settle in, Emma could not shake the feeling that something deeper remained hidden, a final revelation that had not yet emerged. The balance between gratitude and anger was precarious, each emotion nudging her toward questions she was still too afraid to voice. The story of her family was not yet complete, and somewhere in the shadows, the truth waited, patient and unyielding. Emma stared out the window at the city, rain lightly streaking the glass, neon reflections bleeding across the wet streets. She realized that the next steps would require courage. Not just the courage to demand answers, but the courage to face them, whatever form they might take. And somewhere in her heart, a quiet determination burned. She would uncover the final truth, no matter how shocking, no matter the consequences. Even if it threatened to fracture the world she had always known, the following weeks became a study in subtle observation. Emma's daily life was threaded with new awareness. Every conversation, every glance, every mundane action seemed to carry hidden significance. The apartment, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a stage where every gesture and movement had meaning. She caught her father hesitating by the door, his hand lingering on the doorknob as though he were weighing something he could not say. She noticed her mother folding laundry with a meticulousness that bordered on ritual, a quiet tension in the way her fingers smoothed the fabric again and again. Emma began to retrace her parents' decisions, not just about money, but about life itself. She recalled the countless times she had been told no when asking for small amounts of help, juxtaposed with the ease with which Marcus's needs had been met. The disparity was glaring, yet woven with complexity. It was as if her parents had been balancing invisible scales, choosing lessons over comfort, resilience over ease, and perhaps, inadvertently, fairness over favoritism. But still, the question lingered. Why Marcus? One evening, Emma found herself in the old bookstore where she had once worked. The smell of varnish and paper was unchanged, but the quiet hum of fluorescent lights seemed louder, more insistent. She ran her fingers over the spines of old textbooks, novels, journals, as if seeking answers in the arrangement of their pages. She remembered pouring herself into that space for hours on end, every late-night shift and early morning delivery, believing that her struggle was necessary, unavoidable. And now, the irony stung. Her parents had quietly carried the financial weight all along, yet she had believed she was alone. That night, Emma returned home to find the apartment quiet, the dim glow of lamps casting elongated shadows along the walls. She sat at the kitchen table, the letter from her mother still folded neatly in her hands. The words replayed in her mind, but a gnawing unease persisted. Understanding intentions was one thing, but uncovering the full reasoning behind years of selective secrecy was another entirely. She needed more. She needed the truth. Her opportunity came unexpectedly. One Saturday morning, her father was sitting at the kitchen table, newspaper spread before him, a steaming mug of coffee at his side. The smell of roasted beans mingled with the faint scent of rain lingering from the night before. Emma lingered in the doorway, hesitating. The moment felt fragile, like the hush before a storm. "Dad," she began, voice steady but low, "can we talk?" He looked up, eyes weary but attentive, and nodded. "Of course," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. The room seemed to contract around them, each tick of the clock magnified, each movement loaded with unspoken tension. Emma took a deep breath, organizing the torrent of questions in her mind. "I know about the account," she said. "I know it was for me, untouched for years. I know Marcus's tuition was covered completely. I need to understand. Why the difference? Why me?" Her father leaned back, hands clasped together, eyes distant. "It's complicated," he admitted, voice low, almost reluctant. "It wasn't about favoritism, not really. It was about survival. and about what we thought each of you needed to become the people you were meant to be. Emma frowned, frustration mingling with curiosity. What does that mean? He hesitated, swallowing. When you were younger, there were circumstances, things we were dealing with, challenges we didn't want to burden you with. We knew you were strong, determined. We thought that if you carried the weight yourself, you'd develop resilience. Marcus, well, his path was different. He needed support to thrive in ways we couldn't risk testing him with struggle. It wasn't fairness. It was strategy. And yes, it may have been flawed. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Emma felt a rush of conflicting emotions, understanding, anger, sorrow, and a growing sense of betrayal. The pieces of the puzzle were aligning, but the image they formed was darker and more complex than she had imagined. Strategy? She repeated, incredulous. You made decisions about our lives like pieces on a board? Her father's eyes glimmered with regret. We did. And we failed in ways we never intended. You learned to survive. Marcus. He was given a different kind of protection. It was never meant to diminish you, Emma. But perhaps in practice it did. Emma left the conversation with a mix of relief and unease. She understood, intellectually, the rationale behind their actions, yet her heart wrestled with the emotional cost. She thought of the nights she had spent working, the exhaustion, the loneliness, and the belief that she was carrying a burden alone. The revelation of the account, the silent support kept hidden, felt like both a gift and a betrayal. In the days that followed, Emma began noticing subtler hints of deeper secrets. Financial records hinted at unusual transfers, small amounts that didn't align with ordinary expenses. Conversations she overheard between her parents carried an undercurrent of tension, phrases clipped, careful. And then came the moment that shattered everything. She found a box tucked away in the back of the closet, labeled simply with her name. Inside were stacks of letters, documents, and photographs, evidence of decisions made long before she could understand them. The photographs were the first clue. Images of her parents in a younger, strained version of themselves, meeting with financial advisors, signing documents, whispering in corners. There were bills marked urgent, letters from distant relatives, notes detailing payments made in secret. And then, a folder of correspondence that revealed a deeper truth. Their family had faced financial threats far graver than Emma had ever imagined. Threats they had concealed to protect her and Marcus, choosing who to shield based on need, potential, and circumstance. Emma's breath caught as she read through the letters. Her parents had been meticulous, calculating, and unyielding in their desire to maintain control over the future. The reasoning behind the savings account, the careful funding of Marcus's tuition, even the selective hardships imposed on her, it was all part of a larger, protective design. But with that revelation came another. Some of the hardships she had endured were not accidental. They had been deliberate, tests of her character and resilience, choices made with love but executed with a severity that bordered on cruelty. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on her chest, a suffocating mixture of admiration and bitterness. She understood their intentions, yet the emotional cost was undeniable. The parents she had always trusted, the safe harbor of her childhood, was suddenly a labyrinth of hidden motives and unspoken sacrifices. As she pieced together the evidence, Emma realized that her parents' secrecy had not been a simple act of love. It had been a strategy, one that required precision, calculation, and, at times, deception. Their love was real, profound, and complicated, but the method had left scars that ran deep, shaping her in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. That night, Emma confronted her parents again. this time with the letters and photographs spread across the kitchen table. The air was thick with tension, the muted hum of the refrigerator the only sound between them. Her mother's hands trembled as she reached for a photograph, her eyes glossy with unshed tears. Her father remained stoic, yet Emma could see the weight of years pressing down on him, the quiet resignation of a man who had carried burdens alone for the sake of his children. "We wanted to protect you," her mother whispered, voice breaking. "We wanted you to grow strong. We never imagined it would feel like betrayal. Please understand. We did it out of love." Emma stared at them, the storm of emotions raging inside her. Gratitude for their foresight, sorrow for the hidden burdens, anger at the deliberate hardships, and awe at the enormity of their dedication. And then, just as she felt the fragile tension begin to shift toward resolution, her father spoke, voice low and trembling. "There's one more thing. Something you weren't meant to see until now. It's about why we chose who to protect, and why we kept certain secrets. It's complicated, but it's time you knew the full truth." Emma leaned forward, heart pounding, the weight of anticipation almost unbearable. She sensed that the revelation about to unfold would change everything. Her perception of her parents, of her family, and of herself. And as the room seemed to darken, shadows stretching across the walls like long-forgotten memories, she realized that the story of her life, of her struggle, and of the love that had guided her was about to reach a turning point that none of them could have anticipated. The air in the kitchen was thick, almost suffocating, as Emma and her parents sat in tense silence. The stack of letters, photographs, and documents lay between them, a bridge of truth stretching across decades of carefully hidden intentions. Rain tapped softly against the window, a delicate percussion that underscored the weight of the moment. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing like a warning. The revelation coming next could either fracture her family completely or illuminate the love beneath the layers of secrecy. Her father leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "Emma," he said, voice heavy, "there's something we never told you. Not because we wanted to hide it forever, but because we weren't sure you were ready. You've seen some of the choices we made, but there's more. The reason we treated you and Marcus differently, the reason for the secrecy, and the reason we invested in you in the way we did, it all comes down to something we only understood after it was too late to explain." Emma's pulse quickened. She had expected twists, explanations, perhaps even excuses, but her father's tone suggested something far more profound. She leaned closer, gripping the edge of the table. "Years before you were born," her father began, eyes distant with memory, "we faced financial instability that threatened everything. It wasn't just bills or tuition. It was debts, obligations, even the risk of losing the home you grew up in. At the same time, we had people in our lives whose support was conditional. We made promises, arrangements, and plans with a precision born of fear. It was never fair, Emma, but it was necessary." Her mother's eyes glistened. "We kept the savings account hidden, knowing you would struggle, but believing that struggle would shape you. We gave Marcus a different path. Yes, but not because we loved him more. We needed to balance potential against danger. And somewhere along the way, we feared that explaining this to you would hurt you more than the secret itself." Emma's mind spun. The reasoning was precise, almost surgical, but it didn't diminish the emotional toll. She recalled nights spent working late, exhaustion threading through her body, heart aching with unspoken questions. She remembered the small victories, the sacrifices, the loneliness. And now she understood that all of it had been a deliberate crucible, a test she had endured without knowing it. Then her father said the words that would change everything. Emma. The ultimate reason we kept the account secret, the reason for every difficult choice, was because we discovered something about you. Something that no one else could have seen. You have a strength, a resilience, and a sense of responsibility that we realized only through observation. We needed to see it in full bloom before intervening, before offering the safety net that would secure your future. And now, we finally can. Emma's eyes widened. The revelation was staggering, almost unbearable. Her struggle, her pain, the countless nights spent doubting herself, they had not been meaningless. They had been a testament to her character, the silent proof her parents had been waiting for. The anger, the grief, the envy. They all coalesced into a bittersweet understanding. Her mother reached across the table, placing a trembling hand over hers. We hope you can forgive us for the ways we erred. Our methods were harsh, but our intentions were love. And now, you're ready to receive what we have been quietly preparing for you all along. Emma felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Gratitude mingled with sorrow. Anger softened into understanding, and the sense of isolation she had carried for years began to dissolve. The storm inside her shifted, replaced by a fragile clarity. She was not alone. She had been shaped, tested, and ultimately recognized for the strength she had always carried. Over the following days, the household felt different, lighter, yet still tinged with the weight of unspoken history. Emma's perspective shifted, not just on her parents, but on herself. She began to see that love, even when complicated, could take forms that were difficult to endure, yet profoundly transformative. Every decision, every secret, every hardship had been part of a larger narrative, a story that wove resilience and care into the fabric of her life. Late one evening, Emma sat by her bedroom window, looking out at the quiet city, rain-soaked streets shimmering with the glow of streetlights. She thought of everything she had endured and everything she had learned. The bitterness had softened into understanding, the confusion into insight, and the quiet joy of revelation into a cautious peace. She realized that life was rarely fair, but that within the complexity of human choices lay a form of beauty, messy, flawed, and profoundly human. And as she reflected, she asked herself questions that would linger long after the storm of emotion had passed. Could love justify secrecy? How much of our struggle is shaped by unseen forces, and how much by our own choices? When do hardships become lessons, and when do they become scars? Could forgiveness coexist with anger? And could understanding coexist with grief? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, how many truths lie just beneath the surface of the people we love, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves? Emma didn't have all the answers, and maybe she never would. But in that moment, gazing at the streets below, she understood that life's complexity was part of its beauty. She had survived, she had learned, and she had discovered the hidden layers of love in her family. And sometimes, she realized, the most profound truths were not the ones we sought, but the ones we were finally ready to see. Every year, my partner celebrates their birthday with a big gathering. This year, I completely forgot. When I realized, I tried to apologize, but the hurt in their eyes made me feel like I'd betrayed them. I know it was an honest mistake, but I can't shake the guilt. Can love survive moments where care and attention fail us, even unintentionally? The morning sun filtered weakly through the blinds, painting thin stripes of gold across the floorboards. The apartment was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic outside, a steady pulse that neither intruded nor comforted. Jordan stirred in bed. The covers tangled around his legs, and felt the familiar weight of unease pressing against his chest. Something was off. The air smelled faintly of last night's coffee, slightly burnt, a reminder that he had been too distracted even for basic routines. He swung his legs over the edge of the mattress, bare feet touching the cold wooden floor, and froze. The calendar on the fridge, meticulously marked with colored pens for appointments, deadlines, and celebrations, stared back at him. His heart skipped in a rhythm that felt both frantic and sluggish. The date was circled in bold red letters, his partner, Avery's birthday. Jordan had completely forgotten. For a moment, he couldn't move. The word forgot echoed in his mind like a punch he couldn't dodge. He thought about Avery, sleeping just a few rooms away, peaceful, oblivious, the world around her untouched by his internal chaos. Guilt bubbled up, hot and bitter, choking him. This wasn't just a small oversight. This was Avery's day, a day she had always celebrated with joy, a day Jordan had promised himself he would never let slip. He stumbled into the kitchen, grabbed his phone, and scrolled frantically through messages and reminders that should have reminded him, a digital trail of his failure. Nothing. Nothing at all. His chest tightened, and he felt a cold sweat break across his skin. The idea of facing Avery, of meeting the warmth in her eyes with his own awkwardness, was unbearable. And yet, he had to try. Avery was in the living room, perched on the windowsill, her knees drawn to her chest, staring out at the city that shimmered in muted autumn light. The room smelled faintly of vanilla and lavender, her favorite candles still flickering from last night. She hadn't noticed him yet. Jordan's footsteps were silent, careful, almost reverent. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked in the space between the words. "Hey. Avery?" She turned slowly, eyes widening just a fraction, the smile she had been holding up faltering when it met his. For a moment he thought he saw the hurt before the words were even spoken. "Hey," she said, her voice soft but carrying a weight that made Jordan's stomach twist. He tried to approach, but the floor seemed to tilt beneath him, every step an echo of his own inadequacy. I didn't. You forgot," Avery said, the statement neither angry nor accusatory, but it landed harder than any scream. Her eyes wide and glimmering were pools reflecting disappointment, something deeper than mere irritation. Jordan wanted to vanish, wanted to retreat to the small corner of his mind where mistakes didn't exist. But he couldn't. He could only stand there, frozen. The words stuck somewhere between apology and explanation. "I didn't mean to," he finally whispered, and it sounded hollow, even to him. I lost track. I forgot your birthday, and I know that's huge," Avery finished, and the single word was heavy, curling around his chest like a suffocating vine. She looked away, staring again at the city, her fingers tapping a quiet rhythm against the sill. Jordan's heart pounded against his ribs, an urgent, desperate drumbeat. "I'll make it up," he said, voice trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes. Please." Avery shook her head and Jordan's stomach dropped. The tilt of her head, the faint pursing of lips, the unspoken wall rising between them. He knew he had no defense. Guilt, he realized, wasn't just a feeling. It was a presence, a living shadow, now seated between them. The hours that followed were a blur of attempts. Jordan tried to craft apologies that felt real, not just words spilling out of panic. He cooked, baked, even attempted a last-minute scavenger hunt around the apartment. Small gestures he thought might patch the invisible tear in Avery's trust. But each effort seemed to shrink under the weight of her silence, swallowed by the stillness of the room. Avery finally spoke late that evening, her voice tentative, almost fragile. "I know you didn't do it on purpose," she said. "I know mistakes happen, but it hurts, Jordan. It's not just the forgetting. It's that I matter to you so much. And yet, today, I didn't feel that. And that's scary. Jordan sat beside her, the space between them both a chasm and a bridge. He wanted to reach across, to erase the day, to prove in some tangible way that his love wasn't measured by forgetfulness. He took her hand in his, the gesture small but deliberate, and held on as if he could transfer all the regret, all the desperation, through the warmth of his palm. "I love you," he said simply, the words almost too weak to carry the weight of his remorse. "I always will. I can't change what I did today, but I'll spend every day making sure you never doubt it again." Avery's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and for a moment, there was a fragile truce, a tentative acceptance hovering in the air. But even as they embraced, Jordan felt a gnawing unease, a seed of doubt planted that he couldn't shake. Love, he realized, wasn't just about passion or shared laughter. It was about resilience, about facing moments when care failed, when intentions didn't align with reality, when the heart wavered under the weight of hurt. As night deepened, they sat together on the couch, the city lights bleeding through the blinds in streaks of gold and silver. Jordan's mind replayed the day in relentless loops, the missed reminders, the words he hadn't spoken in time, the shadow crossing Avery's face. Each image was sharper than the last, each a sting he couldn't soothe. And yet, in the quiet, there was a flicker of hope. Love had survived countless challenges before, some monumental, some subtle, but no less real. Perhaps it could endure this too, even if the path forward was uncertain, even if the trust had to be rebuilt, brick by brick. Jordan leaned back, eyes closing, allowing himself the briefest sigh of relief. Tomorrow, he would begin again. He had to. Because love, fragile as it might be, was worth every tremor, every misstep, every unsteady heartbeat. But as he drifted toward a restless sleep, a whisper of unease lingered, a question he couldn't silence. Could a single day of neglect leave a scar permanent enough to shape everything that came after? The apartment settled into silence, the city outside continuing its indifferent hum. Somewhere, far away, the faint chime of a clock marked the passing of time, relentless and unyielding. And Jordan knew, with a clarity that made his chest ache, that the real test of love wasn't in grand gestures or perfect timing. It was in surviving the moments when the heart failed to meet expectation, when care faltered, when the eyes that loved you most gazed back with the faintest shadow of doubt. Morning arrived, not with sunlight, but with a pale gray wash over the apartment, softening the edges of the furniture and casting long shadows across the floor. Jordan woke first, the memory of yesterday still tight in his chest, pressing him into silence. He lay for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, imagining the tiny threads of trust that had frayed between him and Avery, wondering if they could ever be woven back together. Avery was still asleep, curled beneath a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender and vanilla. Her breathing was even, peaceful, as if the world hadn't shifted, as if the day before had been nothing more than a fleeting misstep. Jordan wanted to believe that, but he knew better. He had seen it in her eyes, the hurt that didn't vanish overnight, the disappointment that lingered like a shadow behind her smile. He rose quietly, careful not to wake her, and moved to the kitchen. The apartment was cold, the kind of chill that seeps into bones, making each movement deliberate. He brewed coffee, the aroma curling into the air like a gentle invitation for warmth. Yet even as the steam rose, his mind refused comfort. He tried to imagine the words he could say to repair what had been broken, but they scattered before him, fleeting and inadequate. Finally, Avery stirred. She stretched languidly, hair falling across her face in soft waves, and Jordan felt the old pull of affection twist with guilt. She glanced at him, a polite smile curving her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. That faint shadow was still there. "Morning," she said, voice calm but distant. "Morning," Jordan replied, attempting ease he didn't feel. He poured her a cup of coffee and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed briefly, and a small spark of connection reminded him why he loved her so fiercely, why even the weight of yesterday couldn't sever the bond entirely. They ate in silence, the clinking of spoons, and the occasional sip of coffee the only sound in the room. Jordan tried to meet her eyes, searching for any sign that the bridge could be rebuilt today, that laughter and light might return. But Avery seemed elsewhere, a quiet observer of a world Jordan felt increasingly alien in. Later, Jordan suggested a walk. The day was crisp, the kind that made the air feel like glass against skin, sharp and invigorating. Avery agreed without protest, and they stepped out into the street. The city had a certain energy that morning, commuters moving in precise lines, the distant hum of construction, the occasional barking dog, all forming a rhythm that contrasted starkly with the unease between them. They walked side by side, Jordan careful to respect the fragile silence. Avery looking ahead, eyes tracing the horizon. Every few steps he tried, soft, tentative attempts at conversation, but each time her answers were short, clipped, polite, but distant. Jordan's chest tightened with each failed effort. He could feel the tension coiling between them like a live wire. Each word, each glance, a potential spark for either healing or disaster. "I was thinking," Jordan began, hesitating as the words tangled in his throat. "Maybe I could take you out tonight. Something special. Not just an apology, but, a day for you. To make up for..." Avery held up a hand, stopping him mid-step. "Jordan, it's not just about one day. I know you didn't mean to hurt me. I know that. But what scares me is, what if this is a glimpse of a pattern? What if moments like this, when things matter, slip by, and I'm left wondering if you're really present?" The words landed like stones in a pond, rippling outward. Jordan swallowed hard, feeling both the weight of truth and the sting of accusation. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but deep down he knew she was right. Even if it was an accident, even if he had no malicious intent, the hurt was real, and her fear was valid. "I don't want to be that person, Avery," he said finally. "I want to be present. I want to show up for you. Every day. Not just when it's convenient or when I remember." They continued walking, the cityscape blurring around them as autumn leaves drifted across the pavement. Jordan's mind spun with ideas. Gestures, surprises, words that might convey the depth of his remorse. But each idea felt insufficient. Love, he realized, wasn't about grand gestures alone. It was about consistency, attention, the quiet accumulation of trust over time. One forgotten birthday could shatter that balance if left unaddressed. By late afternoon, they returned to the apartment, their silence broken only by the occasional sigh or the creak of the floorboards. Jordan busied himself with trivial tasks, tidying the living room, folding laundry, anything to demonstrate action, to give tangible proof that he cared, even if words failed. Avery observed him from the couch, a book open in her lap, but eyes watching him with an intensity that made him self-conscious. As evening approached, Jordan attempted a small intervention. He dimmed the lights, lit candles, and set the table for two. The apartment glowed with soft amber light, shadows dancing along the walls. He had spent hours planning the evening, carefully crafting an atmosphere he hoped would communicate both apology and love. Avery entered the room, eyebrows raised slightly. "This is impressive," she said quietly, moving closer to inspect the small details. The folded napkins, the wine he had selected, the soft music playing in the background. Jordan's heart lifted. A small victory. "I wanted tonight to be about you," he said. "Not just saying sorry, but showing it. I know I can't erase yesterday, but maybe I can start rebuilding." They sat down to dinner, the soft clinking of cutlery filling the space between words. Conversation began hesitantly, like the first tentative brush of a brush on canvas. Jordan told small stories from work, and Avery responded with laughter that felt real, yet tinged with a fragility he hadn't heard in days. Each smile, each glance, was a step back toward connection, though he knew the path was uneven, unpredictable. As dessert was served, a simple chocolate mousse, carefully plated, Avery's expression changed. Her eyes, usually warm and steady, flickered with something unreadable. Jordan leaned forward, sensing the shift, a pulse of tension that made his stomach knot. "What is it?" he asked softly. Avery hesitated, fingers tracing the rim of her glass. Sometimes I wonder if you really see me, Jordan. Not just the surface. Not just the moments that are easy to notice, but me. The parts I don't show anyone. The parts that matter the most." Jordan's throat tightened. He reached across the table, taking her hand in both of his, willing her gaze to meet his. "I see you, Avery. All of you. Even the parts you think I don't. And I'll keep trying every single day to make sure you know that." For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant city noises drifting through the window. Then Avery nodded, a slow, deliberate motion that seemed to release some of the tension coiling between them. She squeezed his hand gently, a tentative truce forming, though the undercurrent of unease remained. Later, they moved to the living room. The apartment was quiet, shadows long and soft across the walls. Jordan sat beside Avery, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, head resting lightly against his chest. He felt the fragile pulse of their connection, delicate yet real, like a glass sculpture that could shatter at any misstep. And then, without warning, the phone buzzed. Jordan glanced at it, expecting a message from a friend, a work notification. Something mundane. But the screen displayed a name he didn't recognize. A chill ran down his spine as he hesitated, thumb hovering over the notification. Avery noticed. "Who is it?" she asked, voice calm but curious. Jordan hesitated. I don't know," he said finally, unlocking the phone. The message preview made his chest tighten. "We need to talk about Avery. It's urgent." Avery stiffened beside him, a small tremor running through her hand. Jordan felt a sudden surge of dread, a sense that the fragile trust they had been rebuilding might be about to face a storm far worse than a forgotten birthday. He showed her the message. Avery's eyes widened, lips parting slightly in shock. "Where did this come from?" she whispered, voice tight. "I don't know," Jordan admitted. "It just appeared. I haven't opened anything else, I swear." The room felt smaller suddenly, the shadows darker, the candlelight flickering like a warning. Neither moved. Both sensed the shift. The calm evening had ended, replaced by a tension neither could predict. And as Avery's hand tightened around his, Jordan realized that love was never just about the heart. It was about the storms that tested it, about the secrets and shadows that might be waiting just beyond sight, ready to upend everything they had fought to preserve. And for the first time since the day began, Jordan felt true fear. Not for himself, but for Avery, and for the fragile bond between them. Because sometimes, the hardest battles were not with forgetfulness, not with mistakes, but with the truths lurking unseen, waiting for the moment to surface. The apartment felt colder now, shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls as the last remnants of candlelight flickered. Jordan's hand trembled slightly where it rested on Avery's, a nervous pulse that neither spoke, but both sensed. The phone sat on the coffee table between them, a silent black rectangle holding a mystery that had already begun to erode the fragile peace they'd worked so hard to create. "Do you know who it's from?" Avery asked, her voice quiet, controlled, yet layered with unease. Jordan shook his head. "No. It just came through. I haven't opened any other messages. I thought maybe we could figure it out together." His attempt at reassurance sounded hollow, even to him. Avery's eyes narrowed as she stared at the device. "It says it's urgent, and it mentions me. What kind of message just appears out of nowhere?" Before Jordan could respond, another notification chimed, a subtle vibration across the surface of the table. This time, the preview was gone, leaving only a blinking indicator. His stomach clenched. Something in the tone of the alert, mundane as it seemed, made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. "I'm going to open it," he said, voice low, almost reluctant. He tapped the screen, revealing a series of messages from an unknown number. "We know what you did. Stop lying to her. She deserves the truth." Jordan's pulse quickened. His eyes darted to Avery, whose face had gone pale, lips parted, fingers frozen mid-motion. What does this mean?" she whispered. Her voice carried a tremor Jordan had never heard before, a mixture of fear and disbelief. I don't know," Jordan said. He felt an icy knot forming in his stomach. He wanted to believe it was a prank, some bizarre coincidence, but the words carried a weight impossible to ignore. Avery sank into the couch, pressing her hands to her face as though trying to hold herself together. "Jordan, I need to know. I need the truth. What is this about?" He reached for her, his hand brushing hers. "I swear, I don't know. I've never even seen this number before." Her gaze snapped up, sharp, almost accusatory, and for the first time Jordan felt the full force of her fear directed at him. Not just fear, but suspicion, the kind that could cut deeper than disappointment or anger. I can't just sit here with this," she said, voice breaking. "Something is happening, and I don't know if you're telling me everything." Jordan's mind raced. Every scenario, every possibility he could imagine spiraled out of control. The calm they had painstakingly rebuilt over the day before was collapsing, replaced by a storm that neither of them could navigate blindly. He took a deep breath. "Avery, whatever this is, we'll figure it out. I promise, but I need you to trust me. Please." She hesitated, torn between fear and the trust she still wanted to hold on to. Finally she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible motion, as though clinging to a lifeline she wasn't entirely certain would hold. Jordan scrolled through the messages again, tracing the cryptic words in the dim light. Then a single line at the bottom made him freeze. "Meet us. Tonight. By the old bridge. Alone." The words seemed to vibrate off the screen. Avery's breath hitched beside him. "The old bridge?" she echoed. "You mean the one we went to that first night? The one by the river?" Jordan nodded. Memories of that night surfaced. The cold wind whipping against their faces. The city lights reflecting on water like shards of broken glass. The nervous laughter. The unspoken promises they had exchanged. It was supposed to be a happy memory, one of their earliest moments together, now tainted by the implication that someone knew something. Someone had been watching, and now wanted answers. I think we have to go," Jordan said, the words tasting bitter. We need to know what this is about before it spirals further. Avery didn't respond immediately. She stared at the phone, then at Jordan, then back at the window where darkness had settled over the city. The wind picked up outside, rattling the panes and carrying a hint of cold dampness into the apartment. Her hands clenched into fists. "We have to be careful," she said finally. "I don't know what we're walking into." The drive to the bridge was tense, almost unbearable. Jordan kept his hands tight on the wheel, eyes darting to the shadows that clung to the edges of the streets. Avery sat beside him, silent, head resting against the passenger window, eyes fixed on the passing cityscape. Neither spoke. Words felt fragile and meaningless against the backdrop of an unknown threat. When they arrived, the bridge loomed ahead, skeletal and metallic in the night, its beams cutting through the darkness like silent sentinels. The river below churned quietly, reflecting the moonlight in fractured patterns. Jordan parked a few yards back, leaving the engine running, both of them hesitant to step into a place that had once been so safe. "Stay close," Jordan said, taking Avery's hand. The simple gesture felt urgent, protective, almost desperate. She nodded, gripping his hand tightly in return. The bridge was empty, yet the sense of being watched was palpable. Jordan's eyes scanned the shadows, the water, the concrete pillars, searching for any sign of life. And then he saw it. A figure standing near the far end, cloaked in darkness, features obscured. Avery froze beside him. "Who is that?" she whispered. Jordan shook his head, his chest tight. "I don't know, but we'll find out." As they approached, the figure stepped forward, revealing a familiar silhouette, someone they had once trusted implicitly, a presence Jordan had thought was long forgotten. The shock hit like a punch to the gut. "Avery," the figure said, voice low but unmistakable. "We need to talk." Jordan's stomach dropped. Recognition washed over him, sharp and bitter. "You," he began, words faltering. "I thought? How did—" The figure held up a hand, silencing him. "It's worse than you realize. What you think you know, it's only part of the story. Avery, there's something you need to understand." Avery's grip on Jordan's hand tightened, a lifeline she refused to let go of despite the fear building in her chest. The figure continued, voice trembling with urgency. "You've been living a lie, both of you, without even realizing it. The events of yesterday, the messages, the forgotten birthday, it's all connected. And now, the truth is coming to light." Jordan's mind raced. Lies? Connected? The words made no immediate sense, yet carried a weight that demanded attention. What do you mean?" he asked, voice tight. The figure took a deep breath. "Jordan. Avery. The reason these messages started appearing, the reason I reached out, it's because someone has been manipulating events around you. Someone has been watching, interfering, even creating situations to test the limits of your trust." Avery's eyes widened, heart pounding against her ribcage. "Manipulating? Who? Why?" The figure's gaze fell on Jordan, piercing. "Someone close to you. Someone you both trusted. They wanted to see if love could survive neglect, betrayal, even accidents. They've been orchestrating events, pushing you toward this moment." Jordan felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. His chest tightened, his mind spinning. "You mean someone set all of this up?" The figure nodded slowly. "Every forgotten detail, every hurt, every test, it was deliberate. And now, you must decide. Will you trust each other enough to survive what comes next?" Avery turned to Jordan, eyes shimmering with tears, a storm of emotions raging within. "Jordan, what do we do?" He swallowed hard, voice steady despite the turmoil. "We face it. together. Whoever's behind this, they don't get to control us. Not our love, not our trust. The figure stepped back, fading slightly into the darkness. Good. But know this. Truth has consequences. And tonight, you will uncover them. Nothing will ever be the same. And then, as suddenly as they appeared, the figure vanished into the shadows, leaving Jordan and Avery alone on the bridge, the river below whispering secrets they were only beginning to understand. The silence that followed was suffocating. The cold night air pressed against them, yet neither moved. Their hands remained entwined, a fragile anchor in a world that suddenly seemed infinitely larger and far more dangerous than they had imagined. Jordan's mind raced, processing every detail, the messages, the manipulations, the stranger's warning. And then, a creeping, horrifying thought struck him. What if this isn't just about testing our love? What if someone we trust is capable of far worse? Avery sensed his fear, and without words leaned into him. "We'll get through this," she whispered. "We have to." But deep down, Jordan knew that surviving tonight would demand more than courage. It would demand truth, and the truth, when it came, would be more shocking than either of them could possibly imagine. The wind whipped across the bridge, sharp and relentless, carrying a chill that seeped through Jordan's coat and into his bones. Avery pressed closer, her body taut with anticipation, as if the air itself had become electric, with unseen forces. The city behind them glittered with indifferent lights, unaware of the storm unfolding on this forgotten stretch of steel and concrete. "Whatever happens next," Jordan whispered, gripping Avery's hand, "we face it together. No secrets, no hesitation. We survive or fail as one." Avery nodded, eyes bright with fear and determination, the faint sheen of tears catching the moonlight. "Together," she echoed. They waited, the river churning beneath them, the darkness stretching like a living thing. Minutes passed in silence, each heartbeat sounding unnaturally loud in Jordan's chest. Then a sound, a soft shuffle like someone stepping on loose gravel, echoed from the far end of the bridge. Jordan stiffened, his mind flashing through every possible scenario, every danger that could emerge from the shadows. A figure emerged, this time not shrouded in mystery but fully revealed. Familiar, yet horrifying in its familiarity. It was someone they had trusted, someone they had welcomed into their lives without hesitation, someone Jordan had considered a friend. Their expression was unreadable, calm, yet carrying a cold precision that made the blood drain from Jordan's face. "Alex," Jordan breathed, disbelief and fear interlacing. Alex smiled faintly, the kind of smile that made Jordan's stomach twist. "Hello, both of you," they said softly. "I see you've discovered the messages. Good. That's a start." Avery's grip on Jordan's hand tightened as she took a small step back. "Why? Why are you doing this? What is all of this about?" Alex's gaze swept over them, unflinching. "It's simple, really. I wanted to see the truth. I wanted to understand if your love was real, strong enough to survive neglect, betrayal, accidents, and fear. I had to orchestrate the events to find out, to test your bond. You see, humans, they often hide their weaknesses until they're revealed under pressure." Jordan felt a surge of rage, disbelief, and betrayal. "You set this up? All of it? The messages, the timing, the manipulation?" His voice rose, anger cracking the edges of his restraint. "You toyed with us?" Alex's expression didn't falter. "Not toyed. Observed, studied, tested. Sometimes the only way to uncover true strength is through chaos. I only intervened to create conditions that would reveal who you really are. I needed to know. Was love unconditional? Or would it crumble under the smallest fracture?" Avery shook her head, horrified. This is sick. This isn't love. This isn't testing. It's cruel. You put us through hell just to satisfy your curiosity? Alex stepped closer, voice lowering, chillingly calm. Consider it an experiment. And now, you've both passed the preliminary stage. But there's more. The truth is deeper, more dangerous than you realize. The events you've experienced are merely surface ripples of something far larger. Jordan's pulse quickened. What do you mean? What larger truth? Alex gestured toward the water, the river below swirling like liquid night. There are things you don't know about your pasts, about your connections, about the people who enter your lives and disappear. The forgotten birthday, the messages, the fear. It's all connected to someone you trust, someone you never suspected. And tonight, the ultimate revelation comes. Avery's breath caught. Who? Who is it? Alex's gaze shifted toward Jordan, piercing. It's not someone new. It's not a stranger lurking in the shadows. It's the one you believed you knew best. The person who shaped your life without you realizing it, whose presence has always been closer than you thought. And they're here, watching, waiting. Jordan's stomach dropped, icy dread spreading through him. You mean someone we've always known? Alex nodded slowly. Yes, someone who would never forgive a mistake. Someone who orchestrated these events not for curiosity, but for control. And now, the final piece of truth must be revealed. Are you ready? Avery's hand trembled in Jordan's as she nodded. We have to be. Alex smiled faintly. Then look behind you. Jordan and Avery turned slowly, and there, at the far end of the bridge, standing partially obscured by the shadows, was a figure they recognized instantly. Someone who had shared their home, their secrets, their everyday life. Someone whose smiles, whose laughter, had felt warm and real, until now. It was Avery's sibling, Emily. Avery whispered, her voice barely audible, a mixture of shock and betrayal. Emily stepped forward, expression calm, cold, almost clinical. You didn't see this coming, did you? She asked, eyes scanning both Jordan and Avery as if cataloging their reactions. Everything, the messages, the tests, the manipulated events, was to see if your love could survive scrutiny, to see if you could resist chaos, if you could be honest with each other under pressure. Jordan's chest tightened. But why? Why would you do this? You're family. Emily's smile was small, tight. That's precisely why. I needed to know if you two could endure trials that were intentionally constructed. Love isn't just about joy or shared laughter. It's about surviving deceit, uncertainty, and fear. I wanted to know, could you? Avery's hands shook as she stepped back. This is insane. You traumatized us for what? Some experiment? Some twisted idea of control? Emily's eyes softened slightly, almost imperceptibly. Not control. Observation. Understanding. I couldn't interfere in the natural course of your relationship directly, so I created conditions that would reveal who you truly are. Jordan's voice broke, fury and disbelief mingling. You destroyed our trust. You played with our lives, our emotions. This wasn't just a test. It was manipulation. Cruelty. Emily sighed, almost mournful. Perhaps. But it was necessary. Only now can the truth emerge fully. Avery's voice was sharp, trembling with fury. Truth? We've been lied to every step of the way, every gesture, every moment. Tainted. Emily took a step closer, her shadow falling across the bridge. Not tainted, illuminated. The ultimate revelation isn't that your love failed. It's that it survived. You confronted fear, doubt, uncertainty, and you did it together. That is the truth. Jordan blinked, trying to comprehend. So, all of it. The messages, the test, the fear. It wasn't about punishing us. It was testing us. Emily nodded. Yes. And in doing so, I discovered what I feared the most. That your love is real. Stronger than I anticipated. Resilient. Honest. Even in the face of orchestrated chaos. Avery let out a shuddering breath. Tears slipping freely now. That doesn't make it okay, she said softly. It doesn't excuse what you did, but we survived. Together. Jordan wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. We did. And that's what matters. Emily's expression softened, almost imperceptibly warmer. I see that now. You've passed. Not by my design, but by your own strength. Love isn't about perfection. It's about endurance. You have proven it. The wind carried a strange stillness across the bridge. The city lights flickered in the distance, indifferent witnesses to the revelation. The tension, the fear, the uncertainty, all dissipated slowly, leaving in its place a raw, undeniable truth. Jordan looked at Avery, eyes reflecting the moonlight, and the relief that came with surviving the unimaginable. We can start over, he whispered. Not forgetting, not hiding, not fearing. Together. Avery nodded, leaning into him. Together, she repeated, voice stronger now, steadier. And as Emily turned to leave, vanishing into the shadows from whence she came, Jordan realized the final, shocking truth. The greatest threat to their love had never been forgetfulness, or guilt, or fear. It had been the unseen forces testing them from within their closest circle. And yet, having faced it, they had emerged not broken, but stronger. The bridge was quiet once more, the river below carrying the reflections of city lights like fragments of a shattered past now reconciled. Jordan and Avery stood together, hands clasped, hearts unshakable, knowing that love, when truly tested, could endure even the most orchestrated chaos. Because sometimes the deepest trials don't come from strangers or circumstance. They come from the people who know us best. And surviving that is the most powerful proof of all. The night had deepened over the city, and the bridge stood silent, a lonely sentinel over the restless river below. Jordan and Avery remained there, side by side, their hands still intertwined, hearts still racing from the confrontation that had shattered and rebuilt everything they thought they knew. The wind softened, carrying whispers of water against steel, a quiet reminder that the world went on, indifferent to human drama, yet intimate in the ways it touched those willing to feel deeply. Jordan looked out across the river, the water reflecting fractured shards of moonlight. It was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. The way the city's lights danced in the ripples, fragile and fleeting. He realized how fragile moments of connection were, how easily trust could slip through fingers if not nurtured. Yet, there was beauty in fragility, in the vulnerability of standing on the edge of fear and choosing to step forward anyway. He shifted slightly, feeling Avery lean into him, and allowed himself to exhale for the first time in what felt like days. Avery's gaze followed his. I can't believe we made it through all of that, she murmured, voice low, tinged with wonder and disbelief. I never imagined we'd face something like this. Not together. Not like this. Jordan smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I know. I never imagined either. But maybe that's the point. Love. It isn't about comfort or predictability. It's about surviving the unexpected. Surviving the storms, the lies, the fears, the shadows that creep in even from the people closest to us. She nodded, resting her head against his shoulder. Even Emily, she said quietly. Even the one I thought I knew the best. The betrayal hurt more than anything, but it also showed me how strong we really are. Jordan's voice was reflective, almost meditative. And that's the thing about trust and love. It's not a guarantee that nothing will hurt you. It's the courage to be present, to open your heart anyway, knowing that vulnerability comes with risk. That sometimes the deepest bonds are forged not in moments of ease, but in moments of trial. They stayed on the bridge, silent now, letting the river's soft murmur carry them into a fragile peace. Jordan's mind wandered to the events of the last 24 hours. The forgotten birthday, the messages, the staged manipulations, the confrontation with Emily. Each moment had been a test, a fracture, a challenge to their shared reality, and yet, through every misstep and misfortune, they had chosen each other. Time and again, despite the fear and uncertainty, they had stepped forward together. The city below glimmered like distant constellations, a reminder that life moved inexorably onward. Jordan wondered about all the small decisions that led to this moment. The choice to apologize, the willingness to trust each other again, the courage to confront a painful truth rather than flee from it. In those reflections, he felt a quiet gratitude for resilience, for the capacity to forgive, for the simple yet profound act of choosing love when it was most difficult. Avery lifted her head, eyes meeting his. Do you think people really understand how fragile trust is? How easily it can be shaken? She asked. Or how precious it is when it survives the cracks? Jordan considered her question carefully, feeling the weight of their experiences settle into something like clarity. I think most people only realize it when it's almost too late. When mistakes are made, when moments are forgotten, when secrets or manipulations threaten to unravel everything. And maybe that's why reflection matters. Why we need to examine ourselves, our actions, and the courage of the ones who stay despite the chaos. They lingered a little longer, letting the bridge, the water, and the cool night air offer them solace. The world had been unkind, manipulative, and uncertain. But in surviving, they had uncovered something essential: the endurance of connection, the unyielding power of a bond forged in adversity, and the strength found in facing both truth and fear together. As they finally turned to leave, walking back toward the city lights, Jordan felt a quiet resolve settle in him. There would be other challenges, other moments of doubt, and other tests. Some from within themselves, some from forces beyond their control. But tonight had shown them that the heart's capacity for resilience was greater than the fear of being hurt, that forgiveness could coexist with pain, and that love could survive even when the world seemed determined to undermine it. And as they walked, hand in hand, Jordan's voice carried in reflection, almost as if speaking to the audience beyond the narrative. Think about the moments in your own life where care and attention faltered, where trust wavered. How did you respond? Did you confront the pain, or let it fester in silence? And when you faced challenges, intentional or accidental, did you emerge stronger? Or did fear guide your choices instead? He paused, glancing at Avery, her eyes reflecting the city lights, the subtle courage in her posture, the quiet strength in simply being present. Consider this, he continued, voice slow, deliberate, cinematic in cadence. Can love survive when mistakes are made, when trust is tested, when the people closest to you are both your refuge and your challenge? And more importantly, can you choose to forgive, to stay, and to build something enduring, even after deception, even after pain? The questions hung in the air like soft echoes, reaching beyond the story, beyond the bridge, beyond the city. They were not questions with easy answers, but ones that invited reflection, introspection, and honesty. And in their asking, the story became more than just an account of one couple's trials. It became a mirror, challenging the audience to consider the fragility and resilience of their own bonds, the courage required to face fear, and the enduring power of love tested by circumstance, choice, and truth. The bridge behind them receded into darkness. The river carried away the shadows, and the night settled gently over the city. Jordan and Avery, hand in hand, walked forward into uncertainty, but this time with clarity, with trust renewed, and with hearts unbroken, ready to face whatever the world might demand of them next. And so, the story concludes, leaving the lingering question: when love is tested, and when care fails, intentionally or not, will you rise to meet the challenge, forgive, and embrace the fragile, resilient beauty of a bond that survives against all odds? I was offered a promotion I'd been working toward for years, only to discover it came at the expense of a coworker I mentored. Everyone congratulated me, assuming I'd be happy. I am grateful, but the guilt gnaws at me daily. How do you accept success when you feel like someone else has lost because of it? Rain fell in quiet torrents over the glass and steel towers of the city, each droplet streaking the cold window pane like a fleeting thought. Inside the top floor of one such tower, the hum of fluorescent lights mixed with the soft clatter of keyboards, creating a mechanical heartbeat for the office. Michael Carter sat at his desk, staring at the blinking cursor on his screen. The cursor pulsed like a metronome, marking the time he had spent climbing toward a goal that now felt hollow. He had been working toward this moment for years. Long nights, countless presentations, mentoring sessions, small victories that stacked into a resume thick with ambition. And now it had arrived. The promotion he had chased with the obsession of a man possessed. Yet, when the congratulatory emails and casual "good jobs" came, they felt like knives tucked into envelopes of gold. Because alongside his triumph was an undeniable, gnawing truth. Across the room, Elena Parker leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, staring at the ceiling tiles as if they held the answers to questions she couldn't voice aloud. She had been the one Michael had mentored, the bright young talent he had nurtured over the past 2 years. Her promotions, her small recognitions, even her confidence in meetings, they were all in part the product of his guidance. And yet, the promotion that should have felt like a shared victory now felt like a wedge between them. The office smelled faintly of coffee and paper. The antiseptic sterility softened by the humid scent of rain seeping through a barely sealed window. Michael's phone vibrated on his desk, pulling him from the spiraling thoughts. A message from HR. Congratulations on your promotion. Effective immediately. Please schedule a meeting to discuss next steps. He stared at the text, thumb hovering over the screen, unwilling to celebrate. His mind drifted back to yesterday, the moment the promotion had been announced. The conference room had been filled with smiles, applause, and clinking coffee cups. Michael had felt the heat of every gaze, the weight of expectation, and he had seen Elena's face in that room. It had been a small twitch at first, a tightening around the eyes that betrayed more than she intended. Then the forced smile, the polite clap. It had been there in the briefest of glances, disappointment, maybe even betrayal, a ghost of a reaction that Michael couldn't shake. Michael. The voice snapped him out of the memory. It was Joanne, his colleague from HR, standing at the edge of his workspace. Her heels clicked against the marble floor like a warning. You're coming to the celebratory lunch, right? Everyone's there. You deserve it. He nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, I'll be there. As she walked away, Michael leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under the shift of weight. He wanted to be happy. He wanted to feel the pride that others assumed he did. But guilt, insidious and heavy, wrapped itself around his chest. He felt like he had climbed a ladder built on someone else's missed step, and each congratulatory nod and handshake felt like a reminder of that imbalance. Later, at the small Italian restaurant the team had booked, laughter and chatter bounced off the walls painted in warm terracotta. The smell of garlic, basil, and simmering tomato sauce filled the air. Michael sat quietly at the corner of a long table, smiling when appropriate, but saying little. Elena sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long since gone cold. She spoke softly to a co-worker beside her, but the tension in her shoulders spoke volumes. The lunch stretched, plates cleared and replaced, conversations flowing around him like a current he couldn't join. And then it happened. A toast. The manager, a jovial man with a tendency to speak in booming affirmations, raised his glass. To Michael, for years of dedication, leadership, and finally earning this well-deserved promotion. May your vision continue to guide this team to greatness. Glasses clinked. Michael lifted his, the silverware cold and unfamiliar in his grip. He caught Elena's eyes across the table. She raised her glass too, but there was a question there. A silent inquiry he couldn't answer. Does your victory cost me something? The sound of the toast faded under the clatter of chairs and the hum of conversation as Michael excused himself. Outside, rain had softened into a drizzle, the streetlights reflecting in the puddles like fragmented stars. He walked aimlessly, jacket collar up against the chill, trying to untangle the storm inside him. He thought back to the first day he had met Elena in the office. Fresh from college, eager, bright-eyed, and painfully nervous. He had seen in her the spark he once had, and decided to take her under his wing. He remembered the late nights reviewing reports together, the brainstorming. Sessions where ideas bounced like sparks in the dark, and the time he had stayed after hours to coach her through a difficult client presentation. Every time she succeeded, Michael had felt a fatherly pride, a mentor's satisfaction. He had never imagined that one day his own success might feel like a theft of hers. The next morning, he returned to the office with a fragile attempt at normalcy. But the corridors felt different now, each step echoing with a tension that had not been there before. Whispers that once carried camaraderie now felt like silent judgments. He caught glimpses of colleagues exchanging subtle looks as he passed, and the weight of his promotion sat heavily on his chest. Elena didn't speak to him that day, not directly, but she left a note on his desk. We need to talk. Michael stared at it for what felt like hours, the ink on the paper mocking him. The office around him had become a prison of polished surfaces and fluorescent light. Every reflection, every mirrored surface showed him a man he didn't recognize, a man who had achieved the goal he wanted only to find that its cost was more than he could bear. By the time he entered the conference room for the meeting with Elena, the sky outside had darkened to a deep charcoal, rain streaking down the glass in rivulets. She stood by the window, hands clasped behind her back, posture rigid with tension. Her eyes met his, and in them was a storm of emotions. Disappointment, fear, frustration, and a hint of accusation that twisted like a knife in his gut. Michael, she began, her voice steady but brittle. I don't even know where to start. He swallowed, unsure if words could bridge the chasm that had formed. Elena, I never wanted... You never wanted to hurt me, she interrupted, shaking her head. I know that. But that's exactly the problem. You've been offered what I've been working toward for years, and it feels like I'm invisible in this room. Michael felt the air leave his lungs. He had trained her, guided her, celebrated her victories, and yet, somehow, he had crossed an invisible line. He tried to explain, to justify, but each sentence felt hollow. The room felt impossibly small, the walls pressing in. Outside, The rain drummed a relentless rhythm against the glass, a reminder of the storm both outside and within. "I don't know how to be happy about this," he confessed, voice low. "Every time someone congratulates me, it feels like a lie. Because in some ways, I've taken something from you." Elena looked at him then, really looked, and for a moment the tension cracked. But instead of relief, a new, sharper edge appeared in her eyes. "Michael, maybe it's not just about the promotion. Maybe it's about everything we've built together, and now I'm not sure what that even means anymore." The silence that followed was heavier than any words. Each tick of the clock sounded like a verdict. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and reflective, a world of bright lights mirrored in dark puddles. Michael felt adrift, caught between pride and guilt, ambition and morality. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a part of him knew that this was just the beginning, that the promotion, the guilt, and the tension with Elena were only the surface of a deeper, more insidious storm that had been quietly building. Michael left the conference room feeling hollow, the fluorescent lights of the office buzzing above him like a cruel echo. Every step toward his desk felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself had grown thick with unspoken judgment. He wanted to escape, to vanish into the rain-slick streets outside, but something in him held him there. An unrelenting curiosity, a gnawing need to confront the fallout of what he had achieved. Elena had returned to her workstation, but Michael couldn't shake the way her shoulders had slumped as she left the room. He watched her through the glass partition, her fingers tracing absent-minded patterns across the keyboard, her gaze fixed on lines of code or text that seemed meaningless, as though she were searching for answers in a world that had suddenly lost all sense. The office emptied around him as the evening drew on. Desks grew lonely, the hum of electronics punctuated by the occasional shuffle of feet or the distant ring of a phone. Michael remained seated, staring at his reflection in the darkened monitor, the glow of the city lights outside outlining a shadowed version of himself he barely recognized. He had achieved what he wanted, every accolade, every recognition, every sign of success, but the taste was bitter, metallic, clinging to his tongue. A soft knock pulled him from his reverie. It was Elena, standing hesitantly at the edge of his desk, the dim overhead lights casting shadows across her face. She held a folder in her hands, its edges worn and frayed from constant use. I found these," she said quietly, placing the folder on his desk. Her eyes flicked away, tracing the contours of his reflection in the monitor. "They're old project reports. Things we worked on together. I thought maybe you'd want to see them again." Michael hesitated before opening the folder. Inside were neatly organized reports, meeting notes, charts, remnants of a time when their work had been seamless, collaborative, almost magical. He ran his fingers over the papers, the faint scent of printer ink and paper filling his senses. Each page was a memory, a snapshot of a partnership that had thrived on mutual trust and ambition. "I remember this one," he said softly, pointing to a particularly detailed chart. "We stayed up all night to get the numbers right. You argued with me for hours about the methodology." Elena smiled faintly, a shadow of the warmth she once radiated. "And you still insisted we'd do it your way," she teased, though the humor in her voice was brittle. Michael felt a pang of guilt. It wasn't just the promotion. It was everything that had led to this moment. The small compromises, the quiet sacrifices, the unspoken hierarchy that had grown between them without either noticing. He wanted to tell her he was sorry, but the words seemed inadequate, almost meaningless. "I don't know how to move forward from this," he admitted finally. Every time I try to be happy, I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something I shouldn't have. I don't want to hurt you, Elena, but I don't know how to fix it either." Elena's eyes glimmered with unshed tears, though she quickly blinked them away. "Maybe you don't have to fix it," she said softly. "Maybe you just have to live with it and see if we can find a new balance." Michael wanted to argue, to insist that balance was impossible when one person had gained what the other had lost. But he remained silent, the words lodged somewhere between pride and shame. The days that followed were tense, a delicate dance of civility and suppressed emotion. Michael navigated meetings, presentations, and strategy sessions with the practiced ease of someone who had long mastered the art of appearances. Yet beneath the surface, a subtle undercurrent of mistrust had seeped into the team. Colleagues exchanged glances that lingered too long, whispers that carried just enough doubt to unsettle him. Then, one late evening, the first real twist arrived. Michael was reviewing a quarterly report in his office, the city below glittering like a sea of fractured light, when the phone rang. It was an unknown number, and he almost didn't pick it up. But something in the rhythm of the ringing, a staccato urgency, pulled him in. "Michael Carter?" a voice asked, low and measured. "Yes," he replied cautiously. "You don't know me," the voice continued, "but I know what's been happening. I know about the promotion, and I know what it cost." Michael felt a cold surge run through him. "Who is this?" "A friend," the voice said, "or maybe a reminder. You've been walking in the shadows for a long time, Michael. You've climbed to the top, but you've left a trail behind you. Some things, some people, don't forgive so easily." The line went dead before he could respond. Michael sat frozen, the phone trembling in his hand. Who could have known about the promotion and Elena's loss? Was this someone from the office? Or someone outside, watching, waiting? The next day, the tension in the office became almost unbearable. Michael felt eyes on him at every turn, every whisper, a potential trap. He noticed subtle changes in Elena, an uncharacteristic sharpness in her comments during meetings, a quiet defiance that hadn't been there before. By Friday, he could no longer ignore the growing sense that something was unfolding beyond his control. Documents went missing from shared drives, emails disappeared from inboxes, and small, inexplicable errors began to appear in projects he had overseen. It was as if someone was undermining him, not openly, but with meticulous precision. One evening, Michael stayed late, determined to trace the source. The office was silent, empty chairs looming like ghosts in the dim light. Rain began to fall again, tapping against the windows with a rhythm that seemed almost conspiratorial. He followed digital breadcrumbs, lines of code and files that seemed misplaced, until he arrived at a folder labeled simply Truth. Inside were emails, drafts, and notes, evidence that someone had been manipulating information for months. But what shocked him most was not the manipulation itself. It was the sender. Every file, every altered document, every misleading note traced back to one person, Elena. Michael's heart pounded. He closed the folder, reopened it, convinced he had made a mistake. But the evidence was there, irrefutable. Elena, the person he had mentored, the person he had trusted, the person he had felt guilty for surpassing, was behind it all. He confronted her the next morning, the office buzzing with early activity. "Elena," he said, voice tight with disbelief, This is you, isn't it?" She didn't flinch. She looked at him with an intensity that was almost frightening. "You think you know me, Michael," she said softly, "but you've only ever seen what I let you see. I followed your advice, trusted your mentorship, and yet when the moment came, you took what should have been mine. You were supposed to guide me, not replace me. Michael felt his stomach twist. I never meant to. You never mean anything, she interrupted, voice rising. You climb, you win, and everyone around you pays the price. Do you even understand how it feels to be invisible in the room you worked for? The office felt impossibly small, the walls pressing in with the weight of their shared history. Michael wanted to argue, to explain, to make her see that he had been as blind as she had felt. But no words came, and then, just as suddenly, Elena's tone shifted. But here's the real truth, Michael, she said, voice dropping to a whisper. I didn't do it alone. Someone else wanted to see you fall. Someone who's been pulling strings behind the scenes, feeding me information, pushing me to act. Michael's mind raced. Who could it be? Someone in HR? A rival colleague? The thought made his skin crawl. The office, once a place of structured familiarity, now felt like a labyrinth of betrayal. Elena slid a piece of paper across the desk. This is just the beginning. If you think you've won, you're wrong. You've stepped into a game you don't even understand yet. Michael stared at the paper. On it were names, dates, and transactions he didn't recognize, evidence of something much larger, something orchestrated with precision. And at the top of the page, in bold letters, watch your next move. The city outside had grown dark and stormy again, the rain hammering against the windows as if echoing the chaos now inside his life. Michael felt the walls of his career, his ambition, and his morality closing in, each revelation pulling him deeper into a world he thought he had mastered, but clearly did not. And as he looked at Elena, calm and composed, a chilling realization struck him. The guilt he had felt over her loss was only the surface of a much darker reality. The promotion, the mentorship, the apparent betrayal, none of it had been as simple as it seemed. He had been playing a role in a story much larger than his own ambitions, a story where every move was watched, every trust tested, and every victory potentially lethal. Michael didn't know how this would end, but he knew one thing. Nothing, not even his success, would ever feel safe again. The office had emptied hours ago. Only the faint hum of the air conditioning and the occasional creak of settling floors broke the silence. Michael sat at his desk, the warning from the mysterious note burning in his mind. His hands hovered over the folder Elena had left, though he hadn't touched it since the confrontation. Each name, each date, each transaction felt like a breadcrumb, leading him down a path he wasn't sure he was ready to walk. He stared out the window. The city sprawled beneath him, a grid of lights reflecting the storm above. Rain beat against the glass again, relentless, as if nature itself had become a mirror for the chaos inside him. Michael ran a hand through his hair, feeling the tension tighten across his shoulders. He wanted clarity, but clarity seemed impossibly far away, drowned under layers of betrayal, guilt, and uncertainty. The phone rang again, piercing the quiet. His heart leapt, but he didn't answer immediately. The screen showed no number, just a blank display. After a long pause, he picked up. "Michael Carter," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You're walking in circles," the voice said. Calm, precise, male. And each circle brings you closer to a truth you don't yet want to see. "Who is this?" Michael demanded, his pulse quickening. "You'll know soon enough," the voice replied. "Stop looking at Elena as the enemy. She's a piece in a larger puzzle. And you, Michael, are in the center, whether you like it or not." The line went dead again, leaving him with the oppressive weight of silence. Michael felt as if the walls of the office were closing in, narrowing around him like the pages of a book he couldn't put down. He realized, with a sickening certainty, that he had underestimated the depth of what he was entangled in. By the following morning, paranoia had begun to gnaw at him. He noticed subtle signs in the office: a coffee cup slightly out of place, a chair that had been turned when he was sure he had left it facing the desk, files that seemed to disappear and reappear on his computer without explanation. Every step, every glance, felt scrutinized. He began keeping a notebook, jotting down inconsistencies, small anomalies, any clue that might give him a semblance of control. Elena approached him again that morning, her presence calm but deliberate. She leaned against the edge of his desk, arms folded. "I didn't want this," she said softly, "but it's already begun. You're going to find things you never thought existed, and there's no turning back." Michael looked at her, searching for the anger, the betrayal, the mentor-mentee bond that had once existed. But he saw something else: determination. Not just personal determination, but the calculated precision of someone playing a role far beyond what either of them had imagined. "I don't understand," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Why? Why would anyone set this up?" Elena's eyes glimmered with something unreadable. "Because this isn't just about promotions, Michael. This is about leverage, about power, about survival in a world that doesn't reward honesty. You think your promotion was the pinnacle of achievement? You were wrong. That was just the opening move." For the next week, Michael moved through his days like a man walking through a minefield. Every email, every meeting, every casual conversation felt loaded. His reflection in polished surfaces seemed to mock him. A man who had sought success, only to be ensnared in a web he hadn't even realized existed. One evening, Michael received a package at his apartment. No return address, only a small locked USB drive, and a note in neat, almost clinical handwriting. "Plug it in. Then you'll understand." He stared at the drive, knowing instinctively that it was dangerous, but compelled by curiosity and the gnawing need to understand what had been set in motion. At home, he locked the door behind him and inserted the drive into his laptop. Files appeared immediately, folders labeled with dates, project names, and internal communications. But one file stood out: a video, time-stamped for just last week. He opened it. The footage was grainy, taken from a corner of the office security camera. He watched, heart racing, as Elena and an unknown man entered his office late one night. The lights dimmed. They were speaking in hushed tones, hands moving over documents and a laptop. He couldn't hear the words clearly, but the intensity in their gestures left no doubt. Something illicit, something carefully orchestrated. Then the camera angle shifted. Michael saw his own files being manipulated, emails being altered, systems being accessed remotely. And in that instant, he realized Elena hadn't acted alone. Someone else had orchestrated the chaos, someone who had the knowledge, access, and motive to manipulate both of them. Panic surged. Who could it be? A colleague? HR? His manager? The thought that it could be someone above him, someone untouchable, made his stomach twist with fear. The next day he confronted Elena again. This time his voice was steadier, more controlled. "I saw the video," he said, laying the laptop on her desk. "It's not just you. Who is he?" Elena's calmness was unnerving. "You're finally seeing the bigger picture. He's someone you've been overlooking, someone you trust, someone whose position allows him to manipulate everything without leaving a trace." Michael's mind raced through possibilities. Who in the office had both access and motive? His manager? HR? The thought made him shiver. Elena continued, almost gently. "And now, Michael, you're going to have to make a choice. Do you continue playing by the rules that no longer exist? Or do you step into the shadows and play the game on their terms? He felt trapped. Every option carried risk, betrayal, and moral compromise. Yet the drive to reclaim control, to understand, was stronger than fear. He realized he couldn't rely on anyone else, least of all Elena, who had proven both ally and adversary. The following days became a tense dance of surveillance, strategy, and quiet observation. Michael monitored emails, tracked system access logs, and even began recording interactions discreetly. He discovered subtle signs of manipulation. A misfiled report here, an altered spreadsheet there. The patterns were faint, but unmistakable. Someone was orchestrating a campaign to destabilize him, and it was methodical, relentless. Then came the second twist. A meeting request from his manager, unusual in its urgency. Michael entered the office cautiously, finding his manager alone in a dimly lit conference room. The air was thick, scented faintly with the remnants of coffee and old wood polish. "Michael," his manager began, voice low, eyes piercing. "I hear things have been difficult. Tensions with Elena, disruptions in workflow. I want to help." Michael felt a shiver. "Help? Or are you part of this?" The manager's expression didn't change. "Sometimes, Michael, the people you trust most are the ones you need to question first. You've been chosen for a position not everyone deserves, but some people will test you, push you to extremes. If you can survive it, you'll come out stronger. If not, well, that's part of the process." The words felt like a threat wrapped in mentorship. Michael left the meeting with his mind racing. The promotion, the guilt, the manipulations, it was all part of a larger structure, something almost institutional, designed to test loyalty, morality, and resilience. He realized the game he was in wasn't about success or failure. It was about obedience, about navigating invisible rules that could destroy careers and reputations in a heartbeat. That night, Michael returned home, the city lights outside his apartment a blur of color through rain-streaked glass. He sat at his desk, the USB drive still there, files open, lines of code and documents sprawling like a map of treachery. And then he saw it, an anomaly, hidden deep in the metadata of emails he had previously overlooked. A single user account, one he had assumed was a system administrator, had accessed critical files at precise intervals, always masking their presence. He traced the digital trail meticulously, each click, each timestamp leading him closer to the person orchestrating the chaos. And finally, he discovered the truth. The mastermind wasn't Elena, wasn't a colleague, wasn't even his manager. It was someone he had never suspected, a consultant brought in to oversee the promotion transition, someone he had trusted implicitly, someone whose calm, neutral demeanor had made them invisible until now. Michael's hand shook as he stared at the screen. The consultant's access logs, messages, and subtle manipulations painted a picture of deliberate orchestration, a game designed to pit him against Elena, test his responses, and manipulate the office hierarchy without anyone realizing. And then the final horrifying realization. Every step of the promotion, every mentoring session, every decision had been guided, nudged, and monitored by this unseen hand. The guilt he had felt, the tension with Elena, the subtle sabotage, it had all been part of the plan. He had been a pawn in a game far larger than he could have imagined. Michael leaned back in his chair, the rain outside now a torrential downpour, drumming a relentless rhythm against the windows. For the first time, he understood the true cost of ambition, the fragility of trust, and the darkness that can hide behind the most neutral of faces. And yet, amidst the fear and betrayal, a spark ignited. He could see the pattern, understand the rules, and begin to plot his own moves. The game had been set. The players revealed. And now, Michael knew that survival, and perhaps redemption, would depend on his ability to step into the shadows and play. Michael didn't sleep that night. The apartment was dark, save for the pale glow of the laptop illuminating his face, casting shadows that made his eyes look hollow, almost unrecognizable. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets outside glistening like liquid silver under the city lights. The air smelled faintly of wet asphalt, and the distant hum of traffic was a low, almost menacing drone. He traced every digital breadcrumb, mapping the consultant's movements, their subtle manipulations, the invisible hands that had guided him toward his promotion. Every file, every message, every carefully orchestrated moment pointed to a singular, coldly intelligent mind. Michael's pulse quickened as he realized the consultant had not just been observing. This person had been engineering events to see how far Michael would go, how he would react under moral and professional pressure, and whether he could be molded or broken. The thought made him shiver. Every interaction with Elena, every minor sabotage, even the congratulatory lunch, it had all been a test. And yet, something about it felt personal, directed with a precision that went beyond professional curiosity. Morning arrived, gray and overcast. Michael dressed carefully, choosing neutral colors, blending into the office in a way that made him almost invisible. The office itself was alive with the usual clatter, phones ringing, keyboards tapping, low hums of conversation. But beneath the familiar rhythm, he felt a tension like a taut wire ready to snap. Elena didn't greet him that morning. Instead, she appeared at his doorway silently, hands tucked into her coat pockets, her gaze fixed somewhere past him, as if looking into a dimension he couldn't yet perceive. "Michael," she said softly, "you've seen it now. You know the truth. But do you understand what that means?" He shook his head slowly. "I understand that I've been a pawn, that this consultant has been pulling strings. But I don't understand why. Why go to all this trouble? What's the endgame?" Elena's eyes darkened, almost imperceptibly. "The endgame isn't yours. It's never been yours. They want to see how we react, how loyalty bends, how ambition twists us. They want to watch people break or transform under pressure. And we're the subjects of that experiment." Michael's stomach churned. He wanted to scream, to confront the consultant directly, but the meticulous orchestration made him pause. Every move he had made, every word spoken, had already been analyzed. Acting rashly could have consequences he couldn't foresee. Then the unexpected happened. Elena leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But there's a way to fight back, a way to turn the board against them. But it's dangerous. And it requires trust, something we haven't exactly had." Michael stared at her. Trust. The word felt heavy, almost ironic, given everything that had happened between them. After everything. "How can I trust you?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Because I need you alive in this game. And because we've both been manipulated. If we work together, we have a chance. Alone, we're finished before we even start." The day blurred into a tense chess match. Michael and Elena moved through the office with calculated precision, observing colleagues, checking emails, and following subtle cues, tracing the consultant's influence. Every interaction felt charged, every smile or casual conversation hiding layers of hidden agendas. Late that evening, Michael received another message, this time on a secured channel, encrypted and anonymous. "Meet at the old warehouse. Midnight. Come alone." The words sent a chill down his spine. It had to be the consultant, or someone acting for them. The message carried a tone of inevitability, as if his compliance had been anticipated all along. Michael dressed for stealth. Dark clothing, gloves, a coat with deep pockets. He left the apartment quietly, moving through rain-slicked streets with the cautious grace of someone walking a knife's edge. The city at night was a labyrinth of shadows and reflections, neon signs shimmering in puddles, each step echoing in his ears like a heartbeat he could feel in his chest. The warehouse was abandoned. The large metal doors rusted and creaking as he pushed them open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of mildew. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the cavernous space. A figure stepped out of the darkness. Not Elena, not a colleague, but the consultant. Calm, composed, neutral expression, their presence almost chilling in its precision. "Michael Carter," they said, voice smooth, measured. "I've been expecting you." "You've been manipulating everything," Michael said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Why? Why all this?" The consultant smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. "Because power isn't given, Michael. It's observed, tested, earned, or discarded. You and Elena, you've been part of a test, a game to see how individuals respond to moral compromise and ambition. And now, you're here, at the critical point. Your choice will determine not just your career, but the outcome of everyone involved." Michael felt a wave of anger, betrayal, and fear. So everything, the promotion, the sabotage, the tension between me and Elena, was just an experiment? "Exactly," the consultant said, stepping closer, their shadows stretching across the concrete floor. "Every reaction, every hesitation, every guilt-laden decision has been cataloged, analyzed. And now," they paused, letting the words sink in. "Now you get to decide. Will you continue being a pawn? Or will you step into the game and change it?" Michael's mind raced. He thought of Elena, of the subtle cues they had noticed together, of the small victories and insights they could leverage. He realized he had a choice, not just to survive, but to turn the game against the orchestrator. "I choose to fight," he said finally, voice firm, surprising even himself. The consultant's smile widened, almost imperceptibly. "Brave, bold, but dangerous. Remember this, Michael. In games like these, even allies can become enemies. Even victories can be traps." And then, without warning, the consultant disappeared into the shadows, leaving Michael alone in the warehouse. The silence pressed in, punctuated only by his own breathing, and the faint drip of water from a leaky roof. Michael left the warehouse, mind whirling, heart pounding, aware that the real game had only just begun. He returned to the city streets, where rain had begun again, the neon reflections dancing on wet asphalt like fractured illusions. He knew he couldn't act alone. Elena was the only person he could trust, and together, they began to strategize, to anticipate the consultant's next moves, to turn observation into action. Days passed in tense preparation. Every interaction, every file, every email was scrutinized. Michael and Elena discovered a pattern, subtle manipulations that revealed the consultant's tactics and weaknesses. They coordinated their efforts with surgical precision, using the office environment itself as a stage for countermeasures. And then, the final revelation came. One night, while analyzing financial records and communications, Michael noticed something odd. A series of off-book transactions, small enough to be overlooked, large enough to manipulate careers. Following the thread, he discovered the ultimate truth. The consultant had been acting not alone, but as part of a network, a hidden faction within the company whose goal was total control over promotions, talent, and influence. The depth of the conspiracy stunned him. It wasn't about him. It wasn't about Elena. It was about power, observation, and absolute control. And the shocking part? The faction's leader, the person truly orchestrating, Events was someone Michael had trusted completely, his mentor, the executive who had first encouraged him to pursue the promotion years ago. Every piece of guidance, every push, every challenge, it had all been designed to test, shape, and manipulate him. Michael felt his knees weaken. The betrayal cut deeper than anything he had imagined. Elena stepped beside him, her presence steady, grounding him. "We can stop them," she said quietly. "But we have to be smarter, faster, and we have to trust each other, completely." He nodded, swallowing the bile of betrayal and fear. The stakes had never been higher, and as the rain lashed against the office windows, the city alive and indifferent below, Michael realized that the journey he thought had ended with his promotion was only the beginning. The final act was here. The game was far from over. And in the shadows of ambition, betrayal, and carefully orchestrated chaos, Michael and Elena would have to play smarter, move faster, and confront truths they had never imagined if they wanted to survive. The city was drenched in rain, the streets glistening under flickering neon signs, reflecting the chaos that had enveloped Michael's life. The storm outside seemed to mirror the turmoil within him, a mixture of fear, betrayal, and a determination forged in the crucible of deceit. He and Elena had spent days tracing the consultant's manipulations, untangling a web of deceit that stretched from the top of the company to its farthest quiet corners. Now standing in the executive floor's deserted hallway, Michael felt the weight of every choice he had made pressing down on him. The office lights cast elongated shadows on the polished floors, stretching like fingers reaching for him. Elena moved beside him silently, her eyes sharp, scanning the environment with the precision of someone who had survived manipulations too long to be naive. The final confrontation was close. The executive, the mastermind who had orchestrated everything, had been expecting them, Michael realized, because nothing about the plan had ever been hidden. Every file, every test, every moment of guilt had been meticulously observed, cataloged, and analyzed. The promotion, the tension with Elena, the subtle sabotage, all of it had been a lesson for one purpose: to see how far Michael could be pushed and whether he could adapt. They entered the executive's office. The room was massive, lined with bookshelves and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Rain streaked down the glass, creating distorted reflections of the two intruders as they stepped inside. The executive sat behind a mahogany desk, calm and composed, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Michael," he said smoothly. "Elena, I was wondering how long it would take for you to discover the patterns. Congratulations, by the way. You've performed admirably under pressure." Michael's jaw tightened. Admirably under pressure? You call ruining careers, manipulating trust, and turning people against each other admirable? The executive leaned back, fingers steepled. Life isn't about what's fair. It's about who adapts, who survives, who emerges stronger. You wanted success, Michael. Now you see its cost. Elena stepped forward, her voice low but unwavering. "This ends now. We know everything. We've traced your manipulations. It's over." The executive's smirk widened. "Over? My dear, this is just the beginning. You think you've seen the full extent of the game? The promotion, the sabotages, the distrust. It was all small scale. The real challenge is how you handle the ultimate choice: loyalty or survival, morality or power." Michael felt a cold realization settle in his chest. The promotion hadn't been a reward. It had been a test, the first in a series of escalating challenges designed to see how far he would go and what he would sacrifice to achieve his goals. And now, standing face to face with the orchestrator, he understood that the stakes had always been far higher than he imagined. Elena placed a hand on his arm. We have one chance to turn this around. Together. Are you ready? He nodded, heart hammering in his chest. Let's finish this. The confrontation escalated quickly. Elena and Michael presented the evidence they had gathered. Files showing the consultant's manipulations, hidden emails, off-book transactions, and communications tying the executive to a network within the company designed to control promotions and careers. The executive's calm demeanor faltered for the first time, a flicker of irritation flashing across his face. You've done well, he said finally, voice clipped. But you underestimate the consequences of defiance. Exposing me will destroy everything you've built. Michael's voice rose, carrying a mix of anger, fear, and clarity. You already destroyed trust, integrity, and loyalty. What's left to destroy? The executive's smirk vanished. For the first time, he realized that his carefully controlled experiment had unspooled beyond his predictions. Michael and Elena had adapted, learned the patterns, and were now using the same manipulations against him. It became a battle of wits and strategy. Michael and Elena had anticipated his moves, setting traps within the systems he had relied on to manipulate outcomes. Files were locked, emails rerouted, hidden cameras and monitoring systems exposed. Each revelation was another nail in the coffin of the executive's control. The climax came with a final confrontation in the office's main boardroom. The executive, cornered and visibly frustrated, realized that the network he had relied upon had been compromised. Michael stepped forward, presenting irrefutable proof of the manipulations and the consequences of his actions. This ends today, Michael said firmly. You've underestimated human resilience, loyalty, and the power of collaboration. We won't be pawns anymore. The executive leaned back, his expression darkening. For a moment, silence fell over the room, heavy and suffocating. And then, in a final twist, he smiled faintly, almost admiringly. Well played, he said. Perhaps you were ready all along. With that, the confrontation dissolved into a tense quiet. Michael and Elena had exposed the corruption, neutralized the manipulations, and reclaimed control over their careers. Yet, the emotional and moral landscape of their journey left them changed forever. The cost of ambition, trust, and loyalty had been searing, leaving scars that would not fade quickly. As the storm outside subsided, the city emerging under the first light of dawn, Michael and Elena stood together in silence, reflecting on the path that had led them here. They had won. Not just the battle, but an understanding of themselves and each other that was both painful and invaluable. Michael finally spoke, voice low. I don't think I'll ever see success the same way again. I don't even know if I can be happy about it. Elena nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Maybe happiness isn't the point. Maybe understanding, integrity, and the choices we make, that's the victory. They left the office together, walking into the soft, wet morning, aware that the city, the storm, and the challenges they faced would continue. But for the first time, they felt a measure of control over their lives, their ambitions, and their futures. And yet, the story left questions lingering, the kind that gnawed at the mind long after the immediate danger had passed. Could success ever be truly personal? Or is it always a product of manipulation, circumstance, and unseen forces? How do we reconcile ambition with morality, loyalty with self-interest, and victory with the cost it imposes on others? In a world where trust is fragile and appearances are deceptive, how do we know when to fight, when to compromise, and when to walk away? And finally, if every choice is observed, calculated, and exploited, can we ever truly act freely? Or is freedom itself an illusion carefully curated by forces beyond our control? The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the city washed clean, reflecting light like a mirror of infinite possibilities. Michael and Elena stepped forward into that world scarred, wary, but resolute, aware that life's games would never cease, but prepared to meet them on their own terms. I graduated at the top of my class and worked hard to secure a meaningful career. When I told my parents my first job was at a nonprofit, they said it was beneath my potential and praised my siblings' high-paying corporate job instead. I'm proud of my work, but their disappointment cuts deeper than I expected. How do you reconcile pride in yourself when those closest to you can't see it? The wind scraped softly against the large glass windows of the high-rise office, carrying with it the smell of rain and asphalt. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, reflecting off polished floors that seemed impossibly clean, sterile, and indifferent. Emma sat at her desk, hands folded neatly atop a stack of case files, staring at a screen that displayed spreadsheets and reports that no one outside the walls of this building would ever see. It was supposed to be a moment of triumph. Graduation had been a blur of caps and gowns, proud smiles, and congratulations. She had been the valedictorian, the one everyone expected to go far, to reach the heights that were whispered about in parents' living rooms and school hallways. And yet, here she was, the first day at her new job, at a nonprofit organization tucked into the quieter side of the city. The kind of place that didn't make headlines, didn't post flashy Instagram photos of boardroom victories. Emma's fingers drummed lightly against her desk. She thought about her parents, how they had spoken during her graduation dinner, their words coated with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. "You're too talented for that," her father had said, swirling a glass of wine with exaggerated care. Her mother had nodded, teeth shining, voice pitched high with approval as she mentioned her younger brother, David, who had just accepted a 6-figure position at a tech corporation. "Imagine the prestige, the security," she had said, her eyes glinting with that quiet judgment that lingers even in familial love. The memory burned faintly, like a slow ember in the back of her mind. Emma had tried to smile through it, to laugh along with the toasts and congratulations, but inside, a hollow ache had opened, one she wasn't yet ready to confront. The office itself was small, almost intimate. Sunlight filtered through tall blinds, creating stripes of gold across the beige carpet. There were potted plants in corners, their leaves slightly curling at the edges, trying valiantly to thrive under fluorescent lighting. The hum of conversations from adjoining rooms provided a background rhythm, an understated chorus of purpose. Emma inhaled slowly, letting herself feel the soft weight of her own pride. She had worked for years to reach this point. Late night studying, internships that demanded everything and gave back little, volunteer hours logged at odd times that no one seemed to notice. This work mattered to her. Every project she undertook here had the potential to impact real lives, to carve pathways for those whose voices were too often silenced. And yet, the thought of returning home for the holidays, of answering the inevitable questions, gnawed at her. Her coworker, Lucas, appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, his dark hair falling loosely over his forehead. "Emma, I hope you've had some coffee," he said, leaning casually against the doorframe, the faint scent of cinnamon lingering around him. His grin was easy, disarming, the kind of expression that suggested he had already survived 1,000 first days in offices far more chaotic than this one. "We've got a donor meeting this afternoon, big one. They care about numbers, sure, but they really care about stories. Can you handle stories?" Emma smiled faintly, nodding. "I've got a few ready. I've been preparing all week." Lucas's eyes softened, just a fraction. "Good. You'll do fine. Just remember, this is different from what everyone else thinks you should do. You're here because it matters, not because it's impressive on paper." She nodded again, forcing the pride that was swelling and the doubt that was clawing at her to coexist. And yet, as Lucas walked away, she allowed herself a small, private exhale. Here, she could matter. Here, the work was tangible. The morning passed in a blur of introductions, orientation packets, and shy smiles exchanged with colleagues whose passion was palpable. By noon, Emma found herself alone in the small kitchenette, pouring a cup of tea. Steam rose in thin, fragrant tendrils, curling lazily around her hands. She looked out the window, watching the city stretch and twist beneath her, the streets alive with traffic, pedestrians, the clatter of existence that continued regardless of ambition or expectation. A subtle sadness pulled at her chest. She had imagined a different kind of welcome when she had first started telling people about her choice. Her parents' disappointment, though cloaked in politeness, was a persistent echo, threading its way into every thought, every fleeting moment of joy. It wasn't that she expected them to understand. It was that she had wanted them to be proud. And yet, even as she sipped her tea, she found herself smiling at the thought of the people whose lives she might touch here. Families, children, communities that had been overlooked. The warmth spread unevenly, a bittersweet acknowledgement that fulfillment didn't always require approval. The afternoon brought the donor meeting. The room was vast, with polished wooden floors and tall, imposing chairs that dwarfed the small circle of nonprofit staff. Emma felt the familiar flutter of nerves, that delicate line between excitement and terror. The donor, a middle-aged man with an impeccable suit and a piercing gaze, scanned the room, his attention flicking briefly to each person as if weighing their worth. "Emma," Lucas whispered, giving her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Go on." She stood, clipboard in hand, heart hammering, and began to speak. Her voice, steady at first, gained strength as she recounted stories from the field, of families struggling to keep roofs over their heads, of children whose schools lacked basic supplies, of communities finding hope in small, persistent gestures. As she spoke, she noticed the donor leaning forward, eyes narrowing in concentration, absorbing every detail. By the end of her presentation, he nodded slowly, a slight smile appearing that carried the weight of approval she had longed for elsewhere. "You understand why this matters," he said, voice low but firm. "Not everyone gets that." Emma exhaled, relief washing over her. She returned to her seat, shoulders lighter, heart quietly soaring. Here, she had made a difference, and it felt real. But that evening, when she returned to her apartment, the glow of accomplishment dulled. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "We hope you're reconsidering your career path. David is doing so well in his new position. It's a shame you're not following a similar path." The words landed like a slap, sharp and jarring. Emma stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to respond, to explain, to demand understanding. Instead, she put the phone down, sank onto the couch, and allowed herself to cry. Not just for the words, but for the sense that the people whose love she had always relied on could not see the value in her choices, in her sacrifices, in her triumphs. For nights afterward, she wandered through the city streets, feeling both small and vast at once. Neon signs buzzed overhead, casting fractured light on the wet pavement. People passed by, hurrying along their own paths, some glancing at her with curiosity, some with indifference. She imagined a life where she had taken the corporate route, where her parents' pride had been hers to wear like armor. But the thought felt hollow, devoid of the passion that now coursed through her veins. She remembered the faces of those she had helped, the letters of thanks from families, the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had chosen a path that aligned with her own heart. It was during one of these walks that she first noticed him, A man sitting on the steps of a small bookstore, a notebook balanced on his knee, sketching the world in precise, beautiful lines. He looked up briefly, catching her gaze, and then returned to his work, a fleeting connection that felt heavier than it should. There was something unspoken in the exchange, an acknowledgement that perhaps she wasn't alone in her struggle to be seen, to be understood. The city around them continued in its chaotic dance, but for a moment, there was a stillness, an understanding that life was messy, complicated, and sometimes unbearably lonely. Emma realized then that pride wasn't something handed down. It was cultivated in the quiet victories, in the choices that defined who she was, not in the approval of others. She returned home that night, a strange peace settling over her. She sat by the window, notebook in hand, and began to write. Not reports, not emails, not explanations, but her story. Every doubt, every triumph, every hidden ache found a place on the page. It was hers, unfiltered, unjudged. And as she wrote, she felt the first stirrings of something she had long feared. That perhaps she was enough, even if the people she loved most could not see it. And yet, as the ink dried and the city lights flickered on, a shadow passed over her heart. She could not shake the feeling that there were deeper forces at play, that the world, and even those closest to her, held secrets she had yet to uncover. That night, she slept with a restless mind, dreams filled with whispers, half-seen figures, and the echoing question, how do you reconcile pride in yourself when those closest to you can't see it? The next morning, sunlight spilled hesitantly through the blinds, painting the apartment walls in soft stripes of amber. Emma stirred, the remnants of restless dreams clinging to her mind like fog. She sat up slowly, wrapping herself in a threadbare blanket, and stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible patterns with her eyes. The city outside had awakened, the distant hum of traffic forming a constant, low pulse that seemed to echo the rhythm of her heart. She had made it through the first day. She had spoken her truth, stood in her conviction, and yet the shadow of her parents' disapproval lingered like an uninvited guest. Breakfast was a quiet affair. She poured cereal into a chip bowl and sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the spoons as if it might contain the answer she sought. She tried to push thoughts of her parents aside, but their voices invaded the room with stubborn persistence. Her father's measured tone, praising David's new job as though it were a triumph she could never achieve. Her mother's clipped encouragement, wrapped in polite concern but dripping with expectation. She chewed mechanically, tasting only the texture of the flakes, not the sweetness they promised. Later that day, Emma's phone buzzed. A message from her mother, brief and pointed. We're worried about you. It's hard to watch you waste your potential. Perhaps a visit home would help you reconsider. Emma stared at the screen, the words settling into her chest like cold stones. She felt anger rise first, sharp and almost electric, followed by a deep, searing ache that made her eyes sting. She wanted to respond with everything she had felt, every argument rehearsed in the quiet of the night, but the words refused to form. Instead, she slipped her phone into her pocket and headed out, walking the streets as if distance could shield her from the persistent pressure. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain-soaked asphalt and the faint tang of street vendors cooking. She wandered without purpose, letting her feet guide her past familiar corners and forgotten alleys. It was in one of these alleys, narrow and lined with ivy-covered brick walls, that she saw him again, the man from the bookstore steps. He was seated on a low stone ledge, sketchbook open, his hand moving fluidly across the page. This time, he looked up and smiled. Not a casual acknowledgement, but a deliberate gesture, a quiet invitation. Emma hesitated, the instinct to walk on warring with the strange pull she felt. Finally, she approached. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," he replied, his voice calm, measured, carrying an unspoken depth that made her chest tighten. "You're the girl from the nonprofit, aren't you?" Her brows furrowed. "Excuse me?" He gestured toward her, then back at the sketchbook, where a faint outline of her figure had been traced in light pencil. "I saw you yesterday. On your walk. Couldn't resist sketching. You carry determination, I think. It's rare." Emma blinked, taken aback. She had always been noticed, of course, but rarely in ways that felt genuine. I don't usually get sketched." He chuckled softly, a sound like water over stones. "Few do. Most people are too busy staring at their phones, worrying about what others think." He closed the sketchbook, tucking it under his arm. "I'm Adrian." "Emma," she replied, still trying to reconcile curiosity with caution. They walked together, initially in silence, their steps falling into a rhythm against the uneven pavement. The city moved around them like a living organism. The distant wail of a siren, the clatter of a delivery truck, the faint chatter of early shoppers blending into a symphony of ordinary life. And yet, for Emma, the world seemed to narrow, contracting around the shared space between them. Adrian spoke first. "You seem weighed down, like there's something you're carrying that doesn't belong to you." Emma's lips pressed together. She wanted to tell him everything, the pride, the ache, the suffocating disapproval of those she loved most. But she hesitated. There was something in his gaze that felt like it could understand, but she wasn't ready to surrender fully. "Family," she said finally, voice quiet. "Expectations? Disappointment." He nodded slowly. "Ah, the old paradox. People love you, but they don't always see you. Sometimes the ones closest to us are the hardest to satisfy. But pride is not theirs to give. It's yours." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to hold onto the fragile warmth that his words offered. And yet, the voice of her mother's message lingered like smoke in the room of her mind. Emma's steps faltered, slowing as the weight of unspoken truths pressed against her chest. Their path took them past a small park, the grass still glistening from early morning dew. A fountain in the center gurgled softly, its water catching the sunlight in shifting prisms. Children's laughter echoed from a nearby playground, light and piercing, a reminder of the simple joys that often eluded adult comprehension. Emma sank onto a weathered bench, brushing her hands over the wood, feeling the grain and imperfections beneath her fingers. Adrian sat beside her, the sketchbook now resting across his knees. "You know," he said, voice low, "sometimes disapproval isn't about you at all. Sometimes it's fear. Fear that you might follow a path they didn't choose, that you might see a truth they never could." Emma considered this, the words echoing against walls she hadn't realized she had built around her heart. And if they can't see it? If all they see is what I'm not doing? "Then you carry it for yourself," he replied simply. "And that is enough. For now." They sat in silence for a long moment, the city alive around them, 1,000 stories unfolding in parallel to their own. And then Adrian's expression shifted, a flicker of something guarded, almost imperceptible. He glanced around the park as if measuring the distance to unseen observers. "There's more," he murmured, almost to himself before meeting her eyes again. "I've seen patterns in your family. Things they won't say. Secrets tucked beneath words of concern and pride. You might not be imagining some of this." Emma's heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" He shook his head almost imperceptibly. "Not here. Too many eyes. But if you're willing, I can show you." The notion was thrilling and terrifying. She felt the pull of curiosity, the allure of uncovering hidden truths, battling with the desire to retreat into the comfort of her own small, controlled world. Yet, there was a spark she could not deny. The sense that her life, her choices, her pain might be part of a larger puzzle she had never even known existed. Over the next week, Emma found herself drawn into a clandestine rhythm. Meetings with Adrian were brief, always in places of quiet observation. A library corner, an empty rooftop, a narrow street after dusk. Each encounter peeled back layers of her family's history, hints of secrets buried beneath achievements and social facades. She learned things she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Whispered disputes, subtle manipulations, carefully curated appearances that masked the complex truths behind her parents' expectations. The tension in her chest grew, a slow coil of anxiety and anticipation. She realized that her sense of inadequacy, the sting of disapproval she had carried for so long, was intertwined with a story far larger than her own choices. Yet every revelation carried a cost. Sleep became restless, dreams fragmented, the city outside her window a blur of light and shadow. She found herself questioning everything she had believed about herself and the people she loved. One evening, as rain pattered against her window, she received a package with no return address. Inside was a folder of documents, photographs, and letters that traced her family's history in meticulous detail. Each page revealed connections she had never suspected, business dealings, financial secrets, alliances formed and broken. And at the heart of it all, a single, unsettling question. What did they hope to hide from you? Emma's hands trembled as she read, her mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. She realized then that the path she had chosen, the nonprofit work, the quiet victories, the lives she touched, was not just a statement of her values, but a rebellion in its purest form. By living for others, by embracing authenticity, she was asserting a truth her family had never wanted to confront. And yet, amidst the unfolding revelations, a shadow of doubt lingered. Adrian's motives, while seemingly aligned with her own curiosity, remained opaque. Could she trust him completely? Or was she stepping into another layer of deception, one that could upend everything she thought she knew? That night, sleep finally claimed her, but her dreams were haunted by whispers, by the echo of her parents' voices, by Adrian's cryptic warnings. When morning came, the rain had stopped, leaving streets glistening like silver ribbons. Emma rose, a strange resolve settling over her. She would confront these truths. She would navigate the tangled web of expectation, secrecy, and pride. And she would do it on her own terms. The air in Emma's apartment was thick with the scent of old paper and rain. The folder of documents spread across her dining table like a battlefield. Each photograph, each letter, each ledger entry seemed to pulse with hidden meaning, whispering secrets she had never imagined existed. Her hands hovered above the papers, trembling with anticipation and fear. She had spent her entire life chasing approval, navigating the careful choreography of smiles and polite applause. But these revelations suggested that the foundation she had trusted was built on shadows. The first photograph she picked up showed her father, smiling broadly, his arm draped casually over a man she did not recognize. The caption on the back was precise, almost clinical. April 1998. Negotiations finalized. Confidential. Another letter, typed neatly on official letterhead. Detailed financial maneuvers she had never suspected. As she read through the documents, her pulse quickened. These weren't merely family secrets. They were patterns of manipulation. Small, but deliberate acts meant to shape perception, to control the narrative of achievement. Emma sank into her chair, the weight of realization pressing her shoulders down. Every moment of disapproval, every faint praise that carried hidden judgment now felt like a piece of a puzzle she had only just begun to assemble. She felt a pang of betrayal, deep and raw. She had always believed that love could coexist with understanding, that pride in a child's choices would be unconditional. Now she wasn't sure what she had believed in at all. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She jumped slightly, her fingers instinctively clutching the folder. Adrian stepped into the apartment, dripping from the rain outside, his eyes flicking immediately to the table. "You found it," he said, voice low but steady. Emma's throat tightened. "I don't know if I want to see it or know it," she admitted, her voice trembling. He moved closer, placing a hand on the edge of the table, careful not to touch the papers. Sometimes knowing is the only way to protect yourself, and sometimes it's the only way to understand the people you love and why they act the way they do. She looked up at him, searching for some sign that she could trust him completely. There was intensity in his gaze, a sharpness that cut through the fog of confusion she had carried for years. "Why are you helping me? How do you even know about my family?" Adrian hesitated, then shook his head slightly. "I've known for a long time. More than you realize. But that's not important. What matters is that you see the truth for yourself before you confront them. And there's more. Things they've hidden from everyone, not just you." Emma's chest tightened. She felt both fear and exhilaration, a strange duality that left her unsteady on her feet. "Show me," she said finally, her voice resolute. Over the next few days, Adrian guided her through a maze of discoveries. They visited offices that held archived records, libraries where old newspapers revealed public facades that hid private realities, and digital databases tracing financial and personal transactions. Each revelation added another layer to the narrative, painting a portrait of parents who had carefully curated their public image, while manipulating private outcomes to maintain control over their children's paths. One evening, as the sky bled pink and gold with the setting sun, Adrian handed her a photograph that made her gasp. It was taken at her own graduation, but the focus was not on her. It was a candid shot of her parents speaking quietly to a man she didn't recognize. The expressions on their faces serious, calculating. It looked like they were orchestrating something beyond the joyous celebration around them. "Do you see what I mean?" Adrian asked gently. "They've been controlling the narrative for years, shaping perception, deciding what success looks like for you and for your sibling. This disapproval you feel, it's part of that pattern." Emma felt a wave of anger and grief wash over her. She had fought for every achievement, every opportunity, believing that her parents' disappointment was a reflection of her own shortcomings. Now she realized it was a reflection of their design, a mechanism to guide her in a way that suited them, not her. Her mind flashed back to the moment she had told them about the nonprofit, the carefully composed words, the hope she had carried, the immediate judgment she had received. Every word of disapproval now resonated differently, as part of a deliberate pattern of control. She had been living under their expectations without knowing it. The next morning, she decided it was time to confront them. The drive to their suburban home was long and quiet, the rain having left the streets glistening, reflections of streetlights dancing like ghostly specters on the asphalt. Her heart hammered with every mile, anticipation and dread intermingling. She rehearsed words she might say, questions she might ask, arguments she might make. But she knew deep down that rehearsed words might not suffice. She needed to feel the truth, to witness their reactions, to measure the reality against the revelations she now possessed. Her parents greeted her at the door with smiles that were too bright, their eyes sharp, and calculating beneath the surface. "Emma," her mother said, voice sugar-coated, "so good to see you. We've been worried." Emma's father extended a hand firm and controlled. "We're proud you came all this way," he said, the words heavy with unspoken meaning. She stepped inside, her bag hanging loosely over her shoulder, her mind brimming with documents, photographs, and letters. She allowed herself a moment to breathe, to observe the house, which was immaculate, too immaculate, each object carefully placed, each room perfectly curated, a reflection of the control she now understood had always governed her family's life. "I need to talk to you," she said, voice steady, but carrying an undercurrent of tension. "About everything." Her mother's expression faltered for just a fraction of a second before she regained composure. "Of course, darling. Sit down. Let's discuss." Emma placed the folder on the dining table. "I've learned a lot," she said, voice rising slightly. "About patterns, about decisions, about the way choices have been framed for me and for David. I know about the negotiations, the hidden agreements, the ways in which perception has been manipulated. I know about the disapproval that was never about me, but about control." Her parents exchanged a glance, subtle, almost imperceptible, but loaded with unspoken meaning. Her father leaned back, fingers steepled, expression neutral. "And what do you intend to do with this knowledge?" Emma's chest tightened. "I intend to live my life on my terms. I intend to understand my worth beyond your expectations. I intend to honor my choices without hiding them to meet someone else's definition of success." Her mother's eyes narrowed. "You've always been stubborn," she said quietly, almost a whisper, "and dangerous if left unchecked." Emma froze, the word hanging in the air like a blade. "Dangerous?" "Yes," her father said, tone controlled but sharp. "You've always had insight beyond your years. You notice patterns. You see truths others overlook. That can be threatening." Emma's mind raced. Every word, every document, every discovery clicked into place. Their disapproval, their meticulous planning, their constant insistence on comparing her to David. It was never about love alone. It was about control, about ensuring that she did not disrupt the carefully curated image they had built over decades. She looked at them, and for the first time, she saw the stark reality of who they were. Not just parents, but architects of perception, skilled at guiding outcomes to serve their own narrative. She felt a surge of both fear and liberation. Fear, because the depth of their influence was undeniable. Liberation, because she now understood that her choices, her pride, her life, could no longer be dictated by their hidden designs. Her father's expression softened slightly, as if acknowledging her realization. "You've learned quickly, Emma. Faster than we anticipated." "And now?" she asked, voice steady yet charged with emotion. "Do you expect me to forgive the manipulation, to submit to it?" Her mother's gaze faltered. For the first time, she seemed uncertain. "We never intended harm," she said, carefully chosen words. "We only wanted what was best." Emma felt the irony like a physical weight pressing against her chest. "Best? For you, perhaps, but not for me." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Outside, the wind stirred in the trees, rattling the windows, a subtle accompaniment to the storm brewing within. Emma realized then that understanding did not equal reconciliation. She could see the truth, but whether they could acknowledge it, and whether she could continue to love them without compromise, was an entirely different question. And as she gathered the folder, preparing to leave, she noticed something tucked beneath a chair, a small leather-bound journal she did not recognize. Her mother's eyes flickered to it, and in that instant, Emma realized there was more. Always more. The secrets ran deeper than she had imagined. The narrative of control was not yet complete. Her fingers hovered over the journal, curiosity and trepidation warring within her. When she opened it, the first page contained a single line in her father's precise handwriting. Some truths are only revealed when the time is right. Emma, are you ready? Emma's pulse quickened. The game was far from over. The revelations she had uncovered were merely the beginning, and the path ahead promised truths that could shatter everything she thought she knew about her family, her past, and even herself. For the first time, Emma felt the full weight of her own agency. She understood that pride in herself would not be granted by others. It would have to be claimed, fought for, and protected, even as the shadows of hidden truths threatened to consume the world she had known. And somewhere in the depths of that realization, a quiet thrill stirred. She was no longer merely reacting to the designs of others. She was beginning to write her own narrative, and the story was only just beginning. Emma held the leather-bound journal in her hands, its weight far heavier than its size suggested. The edges were worn. The leather softened from years of handling, as though the secrets it contained had been pressed against countless palms before hers. Her fingers traced the spine, hesitant, and then she opened it, the first page crackling under her touch. Inked in her father's precise handwriting were words that seemed both intimate and calculated. Emma, if you're reading this, it is because you are ready to see everything. A shiver ran down her spine. She had always assumed that adulthood, success, and self-realization were battles fought in isolation, within the confines of one's own mind. But now, holding this journal, she realized that her story, her pride, her struggles, her quiet victories, was intricately entwined with the choices of others, some of them hidden, some of them deliberate, some of them almost malevolent. The pages unfolded like a labyrinth, each entry a doorway into a history she had never been invited to witness. There were letters from distant colleagues, notes detailing financial dealings, personal reflections from her parents about strategy, legacy, and control. There were even entries about her own childhood, her achievements meticulously recorded, her mistakes noted, every milestone filtered through a lens of calculation rather than affection. Emma's chest tightened with every revelation. She had always thought that love and pride were intertwined, but now she saw that the lines between them had been blurred, manipulated, and, in some cases, erased entirely. Her eyes fell on a passage written in her mother's hand, elegant, yet precise. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that protect the truth, even from those we love. Emma must not know everything. Yet, Emma's mind whirled. Protect the truth? What truths could possibly justify years of manipulation, comparisons, and quiet disapproval? She felt a surge of anger, bitter and electric, laced with the sting of betrayal. And yet, beneath that anger, there was something else, a spark of clarity. She was beginning to see not only the magnitude of the secrets, but also the patterns, the repeated cycles of control, and the ways in which her own resilience had been shaped, tested, and, unintentionally perhaps, strengthened. Adrian appeared silently in the doorway, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm of her emotions. "Did you find it?" he asked, voice measured, but carrying the weight of unspoken concern. Emma looked up at him, the journal pressed to her chest. "Yes, but I don't know whether to be angry, to be grateful, or to just feel lost." He stepped closer, eyes softening. "It's natural to feel all of that at once. The point isn't to forgive blindly. The point is to understand, to reclaim your narrative. Every word in that journal, every secret, every omission, They belong to the past. You belong to the present. And the future is yours to shape. Her hands trembled as she closed the journal, the finality of the moment sinking in. She realized that her parents' expectations, their orchestrated disapproval, and even the hidden truths had served, in a strange way, as catalysts. They had forced her to confront her own values, to define success and pride on her own terms. And now, having seen the machinery behind their carefully constructed personas, she felt an unfamiliar sense of liberation. The next day, Emma returned to the nonprofit office, the folder and journal safely tucked away in a drawer at home. The city outside the windows pulsed with life. The hum of traffic, the laughter of children on sidewalks, the distant murmur of a world that moved with its own rhythm. She breathed deeply, allowing the air to fill her lungs, feeling a rare weightlessness as if she had stepped out of one's shadow and into the light of her own making. Her colleagues greeted her with familiar smiles and casual greetings. Lucas noticed the subtle change immediately. "You seem different today," he said, tilting his head, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Emma smiled, a slow, genuine smile, carrying both the weight of recent revelations and the freedom of newfound clarity. "I've realized that pride doesn't come from others. It comes from knowing that you're living authentically. It comes from the choices you make, the impact you have, and the life you build, even if no one else understands it." Throughout the week, Emma immersed herself in her work with renewed purpose. Each interaction, each story, each small victory reminded her that her path was hers alone. And yet, beneath the satisfaction, a lingering tension remained. Her family's secrets, the journal, the patterns of control, they would always be a part of her story, a reminder of the complexity of love, loyalty, and expectation. One evening, as she walked through the city streets after a long day, rain falling gently around her, she thought about Adrian. He had guided her through the maze of revelations, offering both insight and caution, but she knew that ultimately, the journey had been hers alone. She paused under a street lamp, the light reflecting off the wet pavement, and allowed herself a moment to reflect. The world felt both vast and intimate, full of possibilities, shadows and truths, waiting to be uncovered. As she turned to head home, a final realization settled in her mind. Life was not about the approval of others, not about measuring oneself against curated expectations or hidden agendas. It was about claiming agency, embracing imperfection, and navigating the delicate balance between love, autonomy, and understanding. Back in her apartment, she opened a blank page in her notebook and began to write. Not letters, not reports, not explanations, but her own narrative. Words flowed freely, unfiltered, carrying the weight of her experiences, the clarity of hard-won insight, and the spark of hope that she had cultivated despite everything. And in that act, she felt a profound sense of self-possession, a quiet triumph that required no applause, no validation, only the recognition that she was the author of her own life. Yet even in this moment of clarity, questions lingered. Could she ever truly reconcile the love she felt for her parents with the knowledge of their manipulation? Could one separate affection from expectation, or forgiveness from understanding? And how many of the choices she had made were truly her own, shaped subtly by patterns she had only now begun to recognize? Emma realized that some questions had no immediate answers, only the ongoing challenge of living consciously, thoughtfully, and bravely. She closed her notebook, staring out at the city skyline as the lights shimmered in the distance. The shadows of the past remained, but they no longer dictated her path. She had reclaimed her narrative, and in doing so, she had discovered the resilience, pride, and courage that had always been within her. As the camera pans out over the cityscape, the rain-slicked streets reflecting shimmering lights, the voiceover asks the audience to pause, reflect, and consider their own lives. How often do we measure our worth by the approval of others, even when those closest to us cannot see our value? How many choices are truly our own, and how many are shaped by the expectations, judgments, or unspoken patterns around us? And when confronted with the hidden truths of those we love, can we find the courage to define pride, success, and fulfillment on our own terms? In a world where perception can be manipulated and love can coexist with control, what does it mean to truly claim agency over your life and to honor the self that exists beyond the gaze of others? Emma's story lingers in the mind like a quiet echo, a cinematic reminder that the journey to self-understanding is never simple, never linear, but always profoundly human.